The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com. Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from my book, We the People, A Call to Take Back America, which was published back in 2004. This was during the Bush administration. It's an illustrated nonfiction book, and this is from the chapter titled They're Back, page 84. Today the conservatives are set to complete what the railroad barons pushed the Grant administration to start. That would have been in the 1880s, to take democracy and its institutions of governance, which the founders fought and died for, from the hands of humans, citizens, and voters. They're handing control to the very types of monopolistic corporations the founders fought against when they led the Tea Party revolt against the East India Company in Boston Harbor in 1773. In June of 2003, despite protests from millions of Americans, corporate-friendly Michael Powell's FCC lifted some of the last tattered restrictions on media ownership, allowing absolute concentration of the voices we hear into a tiny number of corporate hands. On another front, a major multinational corporation has claimed the right to deceive people in its PR as its First Amendment right to free speech. The New York Times Corporation editorialized in support. Even the ACLU, unable to see the forest for the trees, adopted a misguided advocacy seeking to preserve First Amendment rights, even for corporations who don't legitimately warrant them. In addition, as much as half the federal workforce is slated to be replaced by corporate workers under a new Bush edict. Keep in mind this was 2004. Government, which doesn't have constitutional human rights of privacy and so is answerable to we the people, will then, once big chunks of government are privatized, will then be able to use Fourth Amendment rights of privacy to hide what those workers do and how they do it from the prying eyes of citizens and voters. In a similar fashion, corporate-owned and thus unaccountable to the people voting machines are being installed nationwide. In the last election, these machines often produced vote results so different from exit polls that pollsters who have been successfully calling elections for over 50 years threw their hands up and closed shop. And in the ultimate irony, the man in charge of the Bush administration's economic policy, Secretary of Treasury John Snow, is a multimillionaire campaign contributor, chairman of the Business Roundtable, an elite core of 100 of the nation's most powerful corporate CEOs, and himself a railroad baron. It's a sorry state of affairs, and it shouldn't be that way. Corporations are created by humans to further the goal of making money. And as engineer, architect, and writer Buckminster Fuller said in his brilliant essay, Grunch of Giants, corporations are neither physical nor metaphysical phenomena. They are socio-economic ploys, legally enacted game playing. Corporations are non-living, non-breathing, legal fictions. They feel no pain, they don't need clean water to drink, fresh air to breathe, healthy food to consume, they can live forever, they can't be put in prison, they can change their identity or appearance in a day, they can change their citizenship in an hour, they can rip off parts of themselves and create entirely new entities. Some have compared corporations to robots in that they are human creations that can outlive individual humans, performing their assigned tasks forever. Scientist and prolific author Isaac Asimov, when considering a world where robots had become as functional and intelligent as, and more powerful than, their human creators, posited 3 fundamental laws that would determine the behavior of such potentially dangerous human-made creations. His 3 laws of robotics stipulated that non-living creations must obey humans and never behave in a way that would harm humans. In some famous fictional scenarios, we see the consequences of letting human creations operate without adequate restrictions or limitations. In Arthur C. Clarke's 2001, the onboard computer HAL seizes control of the spaceship from the humans therein. The Terminator film series depicts a time when human-built machines wage war against humanity itself. And in the Matrix films, machines use humans much as we now use them. Asimov's idea was profound, but not altogether original, of course. Thomas Jefferson and James Madison beat him to it by about 200 years with an idea that a constitutional amendment was needed to ensure that the reach of corporations was limited. Something seems to have slipped since then. Until 1886, it was a felony in most states for corporations to give money to politicians or otherwise try, through either lobbying or advertising, to influence elections. Such activity was called bribery and influencing. And the reason it was banned was simple. Corporations can't vote, so what are they doing in politics? And numerous additional laws were passed to restrain corporations from involvement in politics during the era of President Teddy Roosevelt, who said there can be no effective control of corporations while their political activity remains. In Wisconsin, for example, the penalty for any corporate official violating the law and getting cozy with politicians on behalf of the corporation was 5 years in prison and a substantial fine. Prior to 1886, corporations were referred to in U.S. law as artificial persons, similar to the way Star Trek portrays a human-looking robot named Data. Like Asimov's 3 laws of robotics, state laws like that of Wisconsin prevented corporations from harming humans while still allowing people to create their robots, their corporations, and use them to make money. The Wisconsin law said no corporation doing business in this state shall pay or contribute or offer consent or agree to pay or contribute directly or indirectly any money, property, free service of its officers, employees, or thing of value to any political party, organization, committee, or individual for any political purpose whatsoever. We the people.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Greetings, my friends, patriots, lovers of democracy, truth, and justice, believers in peace, freedom, and the American way. It's the Thom Hartmann Program, and excuse me, our first hour today is, as typically on Wednesday, Congressman Mark Pocan. Middays with Mark, taking your calls for the hour at 202-808-9925. Congressman Pocan represents the 2nd District of Wisconsin. He is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Pocan.house.gov is the website. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Hey, thanks, Tom. Glad to be here.
Great to have you with us. So the excuse me, I'm looking at the wrong camera here. So the bank bill, let's deregulate the banks and take us back to close to where we were in 2007 so that the banksters can run off with all the profits again and crash our economy. And by the way, this is on the heels of the announcement, I believe it was yesterday, the day before, that the biggest banks in America, the 6 biggest banks, just had their most profitable quarter, more profitable than they were during the Roaring '20s, more profitable than they were in the '40s, '50s, '60s, '70s, '80s, '90s. This is their most profitable quarter in history. And the Republicans said, hey, and 33 Democrats in the House said, hey, let's deregulate them. What the hell's going on here? Forgive my French.
So this is one where, Elizabeth Warren, I think, deserves a lot of credit. She's taken on, I think, the face of this bill, especially after she stood up against some of her Senate Democrat colleagues who voted for it. I think 17 of them did. In our House, we had a little better in that Leader Pelosi and Maxine Waters, who's ranking on financial services, both opposed this and asked people not to vote for it. We whipped against the bill from the Progressive Caucus. But, at the end of the day, this is a bill that's a giant wet kiss to Wall Street. I think legitimately there are some credit unions and community banks that some of the regulations could be looked at differently than are currently in place. But what this bill does is none of that. It goes farther, and 25 of the 38 largest banks in the country are now considered to have less regulation because of this bill, basically raising the standard from $50 billion to $250 billion to be a smaller bank. Just these banks alone have about $3.5 trillion in assets, about 1/6 of all the money that's out there in the banking sector. And these banks also took about $47 billion in assistance during the 2008 crash. So to say that these are the smaller partners is really a leap. This is really about rolling back Dodd-Frank protections. And there's some other important things in there, like the information that we collected around history of getting loans. The Home Mortgage Disclosure Act portion has been rolled back for all these banks, and that's how we actually know if people are discriminating and doing some of the practices that were really bad previously. So there's a whole bunch of bad things in this bill. It's going to the president's desk. He is going to sign it. Wall Street will stop champagne corks, but unfortunately it didn't really help the consumer at all. And, if they really wanted to fix something for small credit unions and community banks, we could have done something. This just completely blew a hole in Dodd-Frank for, like I said, 25 of the 38 biggest banks.
How does this bill harm communities of color?
So it's how we collect information. There was a lot of redlining and other things done on how people were making loans leading into the crisis. And out of Dodd-Frank, we collected more data on who they're talking to and who they're turning down and why they're turning down and things. Now it's taking away all that data. So basically, you're opening the door to allow discrimination again. And this is something that, for the 33 Democrats in the House and the 17 in the Senate who voted for, they should be ashamed of themselves, because this is something that I think was one of the more important provisions that we had out there to make sure that some people weren't just getting access and some people weren't when it comes to loans and financial services. Yeah,
that's pretty amazing. Leslie Stahl made a comment yesterday or day before at I think it was a PBS forum, and it was pretty shocking. I'm assuming you saw that.
Yeah, and it didn't get as much attention as I had hoped it would have, because it's something I think we all know, but to actually hear it, that the president said it, means all the more. So when she did an interview with him, the president said, I'll read what she's saying his comments were. As he said, his quote, "You know why I do it?" Talking about why he goes after the media. He said, "You know why I do it? I do it to discredit you all and demean you all so that when you write negative stories about me, no one will believe you." And it's right from video. This is what he said. And, that is exactly what he's been doing with the fake news, right? They've done this orchestrated campaign because he knows many of the things he does are outright lies or they're wrong for other reasons, and he doesn't want to have an objective third-party source, the media, to be able to point that out. So he's made a campaign and attack against them from the very beginning, from the campaign onward. And this is scary. I'm a journalism major. This is something that we, as institutions, as democracy, you need to have that objective source. And what he's doing is basically, it's very Putin-like, it's very North Korea-like, right? And I think the fact that there's, some video and that this is now coming out, that people are realizing, I'm hoping it has an impact, although, as you know, 35% of the people, nothing seems to have an impact.
Well, this is also, Viktor Orban in Hungary, Duterte in the Philippines, right. Erdogan in Turkey. I mean, this is a growing trend all over the world of authoritarian regimes trashing the press. This is really, really grim stuff, and it benefits the billionaire-owned right-wing media, the Mercers, the billionaire Mercers supporting Breitbart, bringing it back from life support, billionaire Rupert Murdoch with Fox So-Called News, the billionaires who own the two big radio station conglomerates or whatever you call them, owned by billionaires. And at the same time, it diminishes the credibility of all the non-billionaire owned media, or just all the rest of the media, I guess. And it seems to me that that's probably why Fox and Right Wing Hate Radio are so and Breitbart are so enthusiastically embracing this. If the right-wing, hardcore right-wing billionaire class can cause us to think that if something shows up in the news, that it may well be a lie if it's not on Fox or Breitbart, which carefully curate their content and never trash billionaires or giant corporations that are committing crimes, then they, I mean, whoever controls the media controls the country ultimately. I mean, this could be, in the George Orwell sense, the 1984 sense, this could well be the beginning of the end of democracy in America. Or do you think I'm overstating this?
No, I'll admit I'm maybe a bit biased because I was a journalism school major coming out of college, but I have respect for that institution because it's part of why we have a democracy. A vibrant democracy is, people participate through the electoral process. You've got an independent place to check on facts, so it's not like you're waiting for some supreme leader to tell you what a fact is. And it appears that Donald Trump wants to go back to being the supreme leader who tells us what a fact is, like in a lot of other third world and other authoritarian countries. So, I do find great concern, and that's why, I think more people need to talk about this. There are all the other stuff that's out there. This has really been a very organized, devious, brilliant strategy on behalf of Donald Trump and the right wing.
Yeah. And the last thing I wanted to get to, and then we're going to hit a break and we'll start picking up calls because people are just now starting to call in. Yesterday in Georgia, in the Georgia primary, the Democratic primary, I thought this was fascinating because we had Stacey Evans, as I recall her name is, who was supported by the Democratic establishment, essentially. You had Stacey Abrams, who was a Bernie progressive, essentially. She didn't bind herself to Bernie, but all her positions were identical, or most of them, the vast majority of them, free health care, Medicare for all, free college, all this kind of stuff. And what I thought was, Stacey Abrams won that walking away, like 73 to 20 something. But what really struck me a couple of days ago was that Hillary Clinton endorsed Stacey Abrams, the very progressive candidate. I think that even the so-called establishment Democrats are getting it, that this is how to win elections, is to go back to the FDR roots of the party. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen in the last several weeks, it's been, progressives are winning in these primaries, but they're winning because not just because it's a Democratic primary, because there are superior candidates, and they're talking about issues that resonate beyond just a Democratic primary base. I had a chance to meet Stacey Abrams a few weeks ago when I was in Atlanta. She's an amazing candidate. This is a race that should get national attention because we have a chance to elect the first African-American female governor of any state. But also she's just a solid, great progressive in a state that's emerging to be more and more blue. This is something that should capture national attention because let's face it, things aren't happening at the federal government in a useful way right now. We can see successes in our states and our local communities, and the more governors we have that can be those laboratories for democracy, when we get full control of the federal government again, we can get these things done.
Yeah, amen. Congressman Mark Pocan with us for the hour, taking your calls. It's Middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program. His website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at Rep. Mark Pocan. We will be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan in just a moment. It's coming up on 17 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Middays with Mark, the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, representing Wisconsin's 2nd District, Congressman Mark Pocan. Your questions for the congressman after this. And welcome back. Bob, watching Free Speech TV in Tahlequah, Oklahoma. Bob, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thanks, Tom. Keep getting well. Congressman, glad you're there. I'm going to be straight to the point as fast as I can. The media doesn't cover what's going on in a lot of parts of the country right now, what people are doing to keep their little economies alive in their own necks of the woods. You know what I'm talking about? It's cannabis. The farmer can't grow a field of cannabis, but a guy can grow a house full of marijuana. And whether it's legal or illegal, it's going on all over the country. You're not doing anything in Washington, D.C. that we can see or hear on the air that is protecting us from the Jeff Sessions Jim Crow society or the corporate society that Republican representatives around here represent. They don't represent the people. They don't represent the Indian people, the black people, the white people, the farmers, the women, the children. They don't represent homegrown food, slow-grown food, small business. And they don't like marijuana smokers. And most people do. So how is the Democratic Party going to deal with this if it can't keep Monsanto off the farms? Your response?
Thank you, Bob.
Yeah. So, Bob, I think you're asking me about where the Democrats are in marijuana. Hopefully I got your question correct. I apologize if I don't. So I think I recently saw, Chuck Schumer made some very positive comments on this. I can tell you, when you look at the legislation that comes through Congress, there are a few Republicans, especially in states like California, who've been supportive, but there's a lot of more Democrats and a growing number every day in support. And even some of our moderate to conservative Democrats, if they come from a state, they can see, as you've, I think, stated, Bob, that this is good for the economy. It's a personal choice thing. We can have a better way to regulate it in a safe, legal environment when you have it legal in the states. And I think that is a growing movement. Even in Wisconsin, we recently had our Attorney General, Brad Schimmel, who's, thinks he's reliving the 50s as far as his policies go. He tried to ban CBD oil production from legally. A Republican legislature passed a bill to allow you to grow hemp, and he had to turn back on his words because he had so much opposition. And I believe every Democratic candidate for governor in Wisconsin is supporting marijuana legalization. So I think the good news is the people are with us. I think you're finding more of the elected officials with us. As I've said many times on the show, if the people lead, eventually the leaders will follow. So keep leading, Bob.
Yeah, that's a great one. Congressman, we just have 43 seconds to the break, not enough time to bring a caller on. How is this moving through the House or Senate, if at all, or is this something that, rescheduling pot at the very least, so it's no longer a federal crime? Do you see any movement in that? I mean, this is something that, libertarians support, and Trump seems to be dancing to the tune of a lot of libertarian billionaires, although I'm guessing these billionaires, pot's probably not high up on their list, but what do you expect to be happening here? And is there any sense of forward motion at the federal level?
Yeah, we haven't had a vote in a while, but when we had a vote a few years ago, I think it was pre-Paul Ryan, because since Paul Ryan, not much happens here. At least John Boehner got a couple things done every year. On this, we were within two handfuls of votes of being a pro-marijuana majority in Congress, at least for as far as letting people take their investment, put it in the bank that they make from marijuana business, et cetera. So I think within the next session, we would be in a pro-marijuana majority in Congress.
That is great. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls for the hour. Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. We'll be right back. 21 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. It's Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls. Norma in Woodbridge, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Yes. Thank you for taking my call, Tom. And hi, Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Norma.
My call is about the meeting with Rob Rosenstein today. I don't see how Democrats can't be steaming and knocking on the door in terms of this meeting, which to reveal information from an investigation, that's illegal. And I don't see how the Democrats aren't inflamed right now.
And Norma and Congressman, I'd like to add a question to that too. And I just recently learned that Devin Nunes was part of the Trump transition team. I'm concerned, and maybe you don't want to address this as it's one of your colleagues, but I'm concerned that maybe his multiple attempts to sabotage this investigation have much less to do with protecting Trump and much more to do with finding out if he himself is looking at going to jail.
Yeah, I'll tell you, on Devin Nunes, let me answer that first, Tom. I mean, I have no problem talking about Devin Nunes because he's an embarrassment to this institution. He makes it harder for this to be a functioning place. I mean, at one point, the Intelligence Committee still kind of rode above some of the partisanship here, and all he did is he brought the swamp in the front door, and it's now that committee is a joke, and he has been as false a committee chair of that committee as anyone ever could be. So, you know, I'm hoping that people in California, even though it's a little bit stronger of a Republican district, realize this is a guy who needs to be thrown out because he's exactly what's wrong in Congress. Specifically to Norma's question, Norma, so I just found out, too, the Senate Republicans weren't invited to that meeting, and now they're trying to get in there. This is becoming a bad sitcom as far as, you know, the White House, it's, you know, the way they do this and who they invite. But I agree with you, Norma. I've been following a lot of social media this morning, and people are far more upset than I would argue Democratic leadership is, and they need to be far more outraged because this is, you know, while I don't want to be Russia, because I think the economy and healthcare and so many other issues are really what people think about the most. In this particular case, you can't do this, and we need to have the Democratic leadership stand up far more on this. But it is interesting that the Senate Republicans themselves also are trying to get into this meeting. Again, just another day at the circus.
Yeah. Russ in Hickory Hills, Illinois, listening to WCPT. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Russ.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Pocan. I heard this morning that these guys, the Republicans, are going to rip out what's left of Dodd-Frank. I mean, there is going to be no oversight. If they got $50 trillion in bad loans, there'll be no publication about it. They're going to cover it up now. They're going to go back to before Obama when Bush was running the country because they want nobody to know how bad the economy is going to get. Because I'll tell you something now, Mr. Pocan. They had a poll out today. Ronald McDonald's up 12 points over Donald Trump as long as he's got a D because that's how bad they think of this guy. Have you heard about ripping up Dodd-Frank totally?
Yeah, well, I mean, this bill is a giant gutted hole to it, right? Because you've just made of the 38 largest banks, now 25 of them are considered smaller banks and have had a bunch of regulations from, fair lending practices to all the other regulatory provisions and protections that were in place with Dodd-Frank are now gone because the limit went from $50 billion to $250 billion. That's 1/6 of all the banking economy. So it's a huge amount of money. It's some really, really big banks, and it's a huge problem, and it's going to be signed into law, I think, perhaps even today by the president. This is what could put us exactly back where we were pre-2008.
Keith in Portland, Oregon. We just have a minute to the break. Keith, got a real quick question for Congressman Pocan?
Yes, I just wanted to find out where exactly the House is on the passage for the preserving net neutrality.
Great question, Keith. So right now we have a discharge petition, which is a way to force a vote on it. We need to get 218 signatures. I think virtually every Democrat will be on. I would hope every single Democrat is on. The question is how many Republicans can we get to that 218 number? But we need to have people call their member of the House of Representatives and demand they do this because I know people called us when the decision happened. But now that we've got it through the Senate, this is where we can get it done now. You need to put pressure on your member of Congress and make sure that they support net neutrality, and they have to sign the discharge petition so we can take a vote on it.
And the phone number for that is 202-224-3121, 202-224-3121. And if you're not sure who your representative is, just give them your zip code and they'll connect you right to their office. Congressman Pocan is with us, Congressman Mark Pocan. It's Middays with Mark here on the Thom Hartmann Program. And we'll be back with more of your calls for Congressman Pocan. You can find his website at pocan.house.gov. And you can tweet him at Rep, as in Representative Rep Mark Pocan. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week. It's the Thom Hartmann Program. Middays with Mark. Congressman Mark Pocan with us for the hour, taking your calls. Today we're reading in Thom Hartmann University Book Club from How to Stop Worrying and Start Living, Time-Tested Methods for Conquering Worry by Dale Carnegie, perhaps an appropriate book in the era of Trump. This is from Chapter 2, a magic formula for solving worry situations. Would you like a quick, surefire recipe for handling worry situations, a technique you can start using right away before you go any further in reading this book? Then let me tell you about the method worked out by Willis H. Carrier, the brilliant engineer who launched the air conditioning industry and who headed the world-famous Carrier Corporation out of Syracuse, New York. It is one of the best techniques I've ever heard of for solving worry problems, and I got it from Mr. Carrier personally when we were having lunch together one day at the Engineers Club in New York. When I was a young man, Mr. Carrier said, I worked for the Buffalo Forge Company in Buffalo, New York. I was handed the assignment of installing a gas cleaning device in the plant of the Pittsburgh Plate Glass Company at Crystal City, Missouri, a plant costing millions of dollars. The purpose of this installation was to remove the impurities from the gas so it could be burned without injuring the engines. This method of cleaning gas was new. It had been tried only once before and under different conditions. In my work at Crystal City, Missouri, unforeseen difficulties arose. It worked after a fashion, but not well enough to meet the guarantee we had made. I was stunned by my failure. It was almost as if someone had struck me a blow on the head. My stomach, my insides began to twist and turn. For a while, I was so worried I couldn't sleep. Finally, common sense reminded me that worry wasn't getting me anywhere. So I figured out a way to handle my problem without worrying. It worked superbly. I've been using the same anti-worry technique for more than 30 years. It is simple. Anyone can use it. It consists of 3 steps. Step 1. I analyzed the situation fearlessly and honestly and figured out what was the worst that could possibly happen as a result of this failure. No one was going to jail me or shoot me, that was certain. True, there was also a chance that I could lose my job, and there was also a chance that my employers would have to remove the machinery and lose the $20,000 we had invested. Step 2. After figuring out what was the worst that could possibly happen, I reconciled myself to accepting it, if necessary. I said to myself, this failure will be a blow to my record and it might possibly mean the loss of my job. But if it does, I can always get another position. Conditions could be much worse, and as far as my employers are concerned, well, they realize that we're experimenting with a new method of cleaning gas, and if this experience costs them $20,000, they can stand it. They can charge it up to research, for it is an experiment. After discovering the worst that could possibly happen and reconciling myself to accepting it, if necessary, an extremely important thing happened. I immediately relaxed and felt a sense of peace that I hadn't experienced in days. Step 3. From that time on, I calmly devoted my time and energy to trying to improve upon the worst which I had already accepted mentally. I now tried to figure out ways and means by which I might reduce the loss of $20,000 that we faced. I made several steps and finally figured out that if we spent another $5,000 for additional equipment, our problem would be solved. We did this, and instead of the firm losing $20,000, we made $15,000. I probably would never have been able to do this if I had kept on worrying, because one of the worst features about worrying is that it destroys the mind's ability to concentrate. When we worry, our minds jump here and there and everywhere, and we lose all power of decision. However, when we force ourselves to face the worst and accept it mentally, we then eliminate all these vague imaginings and put ourselves in a position where we are able to concentrate on our problem in the here and now. This incident that I have related occurred many years ago. It worked so superbly that I've been using it ever since, and as a result, my life has been almost completely free from worry. End of quote. Now, why is Willis H. Carrier's magic formula so valuable and so practical, psychologically speaking? Because it yanks us down out of the great gray clouds in which we fumble around when we are blinded by worry. It plants our feet good and solid on the earth. We know where we stand, and if we can't have solid ground under us, how in creation can we ever hope to think anything through? Professor William James, the father of applied psychology, has been dead since 1910, but if he were alive today and could hear this formula for facing the worst, he would heartily approve. How do I know? Because he told his own students, quote, "Be willing to have it so. Be willing to have it so," he said, because acceptance of what has happened is the first step in overcoming the consequences of any misfortune, end quote. The same idea is expressed by Lin Yutang in his widely read book, The Importance of Living. True peace of mind, says this Chinese philosopher, comes from accepting the worst. Psychologically, I think it means the release of energy. That's it exactly. Psychologically, it means a new release of energy. When we have accepted the worst, we have nothing more to lose. And that automatically means we have everything to gain. After facing the worst, Willis H. Carrier reported, I immediately relaxed and felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in days. From that time on, I was able to think. Makes sense, doesn't it? Yet millions of people have wrecked their lives in angry turmoil because they refused to accept the worst, refused to improve upon it, refused to salvage what they could from the wreck. Instead of trying to reconstruct their fortunes, they engaged in a bitter and violent contest of experience and ended up victims of that brooding fixation known as melancholia. Would you like to see how someone else adopted Willis H. Carrier's magic formula and applied it to his own problem? Well, here's one example from a New York oil dealer who was a student in my classes. I was being blackmailed, the student began. I didn't believe it was possible. I didn't believe it could happen outside the movies, but I was actually being blackmailed. And, he goes on with the story. It's a fascinating one. How to Stop Worrying and Start Living by Dale Carnegie. Welcome back to your media support group for We the People, the Thom Hartmann Program. It's Middays with Mark, Congressman Mark Pocan, taking your calls for the hour. And Brad in Elk Grove Village, Illinois, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Congressman Pocan and Thom Hartmann, thank you very much for talking up the Christian right as the complete hypocrites and not as Jesus Christ or God's Spirit that they really are. But my question revolves more around tactics and strategy for the 2018 midterms. And the comment I make kind of feeds into that, and it kind of goes like this. Do you think there would be any benefit towards the Democrats or for the Democrats to say about the Republican base and their support of Donald Trump that they have no interest in democracy or freedom for everyone, and that they're basically looking to control and marginalize those groups they dislike, despise, or hate?
Thank you, Brad.
Yeah. So, Brad, I think while what you're saying is very true, right? We know much about the GOP base. I mean, I would argue half of the remaining Trump base is there because of outright bigotry, racism. They're going to stick with him as long as he continues to be Donald. And while there's some others you would hope that would not want to be affiliated with that ilk, he's been able to maintain that 35%, maybe even slightly more than that. But that's not over 50%. So I think a lot of what we're trying to do is let people know where I think we maybe dropped the ball in 2016. That economically we understand that people's conditions, they don't feel like they're better off when much of the economy has come back, and we've got to address those kind of core issues. And I think if we really do that, and I'll be honest, it's tough for Democrats. I noticed in previous years when I've left to go back home at election time, the final months, I was given a list of 16 things or something, and that's not exactly succinct. It's not exactly a great message. I think one of the things that we did learn this year was in Connor Lamb's special election in Pennsylvania. Not only did he have populist progressive economic policies, I would argue, and he attributes them to his victory, those populist policies, but he localized them. So I think, again, people who actually understand their districts, who can connect issues, whether it be, displacement of jobs because of bad trade policies, The fact that big banks and big corporations have way too much influence out here in D.C., that Donald Trump, when he complains about the swamp, it's only because it's not his swamp. Now it is, and it's even bigger, and he's put his own swamp creatures in. I think we've got to make sure that, we're addressing the issues around the economy and being very specific with people. And I think that is the best message. If I can real quick, too, just came out about 10 minutes ago, Tom, we got talking about that issue with the briefing for Republican legislators and how Democratic leadership wasn't doing too much. They have now put out a statement saying that they shouldn't do the meeting, or at minimum it should be the Gang of 8 leadership that's allowed to go to the meeting. So they are doing something, so that's good. I know people were very concerned online. I've been following it all morning, and now leadership is doing what I just expressed my concern that we weren't doing. So
that's great. Maybe they're listening to the show. Steve in St. Genevieve, Missouri. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Steve? I'm not hearing Steve. You got to listen to your phone, not your radio or TV. Gail in Antelope, California. Hey, Gail, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, good morning, you guys. This is a question for Congressman Pocan. It's kind of a two-parter. I would like to know if, in your opinion, the actions of Devin Nunes, Mark Meadows, and Trey Gowdy, if their activities that they've been engaging in would rise to the level of obstruction of justice. And in the event it doesn't, and they don't end up being thrown in jail by Mark Mueller, and providing the Democrats take back the House in 2018, at that point I would like to know if Congress would be able to take any type of action to, censure or condemn what I deem to be their basically nefarious and treasonous activities.
Yeah, Gail, great question. So let me, if I can, I would break it out a little bit. So I think, one, Trey Gowdy's leaving, so he's going to be gone regardless. Mark Meadows is kind of the spokesperson for the Freedom Caucus, and I think their issues have been somewhat different than Devin Nunes. I think Devin Nunes has really proven to be like the prototype of what everything wrong could be in Congress if we're all in one person. We found Devin Nunes. And do I think that he's obstructed justice? I think we're going to find out through the investigation, but clearly much of what he's done has been seriously questionable. I mean, I think the classic one was when he jumped out of a car one night with a staff person. No one knew where he went. The next day, he suddenly got some information from someone he had to present to the White House, and 2 days later, we found out he went to the White House that night to get the information to bring to the White House. To call him a clown would probably be a better representation of how he's acted rather than a member of Congress.
Well, that's an insult to clowns.
It's an insult to clowns. You're right, Tom. It is totally not fair. I don't mean
clowns
to
are good people. They're trying to make a living, you know?
There you go. Devin Nunes is really the worst of the worst here. So to the second part, Gail, should we take the majority? I think you would have some investigations on some of these other activities, and hopefully you're going to beat Devin Nunes in California in November, but if not, I think he is a very special, unique person in that I think the activities he's done have been extremely unbecoming of a member of Congress.
Morris in Long Beach, California, listening on KPFK, the largest FM station in the country. Morris, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Good morning, gentlemen. Congressman, I'd like to ask you, what is your opinion of the Israeli boycott? And I'm of the opinion that if you don't read, you can't lead. What are the last 3 books that you've read, Mr. Congressman? And thank you, Tom.
Sure. Great questions, Morris. So I'm terrible at remembering names of books, so I'm probably not going to be able to answer that question as well, but let me try to answer the first part. And also in the NDA authorization, the National Defense Authorization Act that we have up this week, I had a couple of amendments around Gaza and the Middle East specifically. We were not ruled into order. Of course, they're not ruling much of any of these into order, but we were trying to get a report about what's going on. Is that going to have an impact on the U.S. or on Israel? Up to this point, 2 years ago, I went to Israel and I went to the West Bank, and I tried to get into Gaza and was denied access by the Israeli government. But I spent a lot of time with folks in Palestine. And everywhere I asked the question about the movement to do a boycott, and it was very mixed. In fact, most people thought it would hurt them economically more. So I have been reluctant to look at that movement. I am very aggressive in saying that we need to stop the expansion of settlements. That's not going to help us get to a two-state solution. I am concerned that when I was there a couple of years ago, Hamas wants a one-state solution. Netanyahu's government now wants a one-state solution. And I think that's the wrong direction because they're both doing it for very different ways that will not be in the best interest of peace in that region. So at this point, based on my conversations with people that we met repeatedly in Palestine, I am not supportive of that movement. However, I want to be real clear, what Israel is doing, especially in the situation of Gaza, I think is a boiling pot. And when it explodes, it is going to have a lot of spillover that's going to affect the United States, and that's why we have to pay far more attention. You cannot have every reaction be shooting live ammunition like they've been doing to people who are protesting, and it's a real mess right now, thanks to Donald Trump.
Doug in Davenport, Iowa. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. Doug? Richard in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Richard, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi, Congressman and Tom. Thanks for taking my call. My question is, I watch the news, I read the news, and it seems like the Republican leadership does not care what Trump does and how low he stoops and whatever crimes he's done. What's your sense? I mean, what is it going to take? Are they, you have sort of an inside story of, at what point is it going to take for them to say enough's enough?
Yeah, Richard, great question because, a lot of the individual rank and file members you talk to, they express some similar concerns that we're expressing, and they're Republicans because Trump is doing things that are in the disinterest of our nation, and they get it, but no one will speak out, and leadership has been what's disappointing. Paul Ryan, during the campaign, would stand up to Donald Trump, and now he rolls over and lets the president rub his belly. The problem is they know their fortunes are largely attached, they think, to the president. And if the president's doing well, they do well. If he's not doing well, at some point, by the time they catch it, it will probably be too late. And we're starting to see that by all these special elections around the country. But if Paul Ryan had the guts, I think he would speak out more and do his party a much better service, and we would have a much harder time winning the majority in November. But Paul Ryan, for whatever reason, has decided that he's going to do absolutely anything the president wants, logical or not, legal or not, and it's one of the reasons that he's been such a great disappointment as a speaker.
Yeah. Although I'm guessing he's going to land a multi-million-dollar job when he bails out. He's done so many good things for so many insanely profitable industries.
I'm guessing he'll make 20 times his congressional salary his first year out.
Yeah, no doubt. Congressman Mark Pocan taking your calls middays with Mark on the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Congressman Pocan's website, pocan.house.gov. You can tweet him at @RepMarkPocan. And welcome back. Kirk in Ukiah, California. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Oh, hello. Good morning. Thanks for taking my call. Excuse me. And thank you again both for what you do. Congressman Pocan, I have a question. In the media, in the corporate media, we don't hear very much about the fact that when your screener answered my call, I had a hard time phrasing this, but when they talk about Obama's Justice Department investigating Trump, they make it sound as if Obama was doing something bad. But if there's enough evidence that they were colluding with the Russians, isn't that their job?
Yeah.
Right?
Precisely, Kirk. I think the best I saw today, I retweeted on my political account. Evan McMullen, a Republican, put out this in response to Donald Trump's, claiming about them going after him, Spygate. And he put, 1, there's no deep state, only laws and those who uphold them. 2, you cooperated with Russia's attack and the collusion accusations against you are credible. 3, the FBI uses informants, not spies, in all investigations And 4, yes, we've never seen a spy scandal like this before. So I thought that was pretty good, so I retweeted it. But, this is Donald Trump's most recent way to try to make his base look the other way and never try to pay attention to what the fake news are reporting, and this is his way to try to provide that misdirection. And
yeah, it's what he told.
I don't think he's going to succeed.
It's what he told Leslie Stahl. Speaking of Leslie in Central Square, New York, you're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hi. It's always amazed me that the Democratic Party would put in the Defensive Authorization Act, which gives the president the right to take any person away and never see him again. And Obama kept right on signing it every year. Now you got a president in there that could really use it against people if there's any kind of disruption. This is terrible. There should be a bill in trying to get rid of it.
Thoughts on the NDAA?
Yeah, that's what we're taking up this week, Leslie. And we had introduced over 500 amendments, Democrats and some Republicans, on the bill. They're taking very few of them. I don't know if you saw also, it's a little bit inside baseball, but officially this week we've had more closed rules, which means you can't necessarily do the normal amendment process where members can have a stay on the floor of Congress, than any session ever under Paul Ryan. And Paul Ryan back home brags he brought regular order back to Congress. This is the opposite, right? This is making us, again, not function, but Paul's really the reason why we don't function. And in this case, the National Defense Bill, I'll vote against. Many people will vote against, but this is not an open process that's providing us any real debate that the nation deserves.
Now, the Constitution, because the founders were so wary of a standing army during times of peace, the Constitution requires that every 2 years, with the exception of the Navy, the Congress has to decide whether it even wants to have a military and to what extent it wants to be funded. Literally every 2 years. That's the NDAA. Where do we go with this? This has just turned into a rubber stamp, has it not?
Yeah, I mean, and this is all the more, reason why, if you look at November, if we have a different majority, when you look at the amount of money that's spent to big defense contractors that could be going other places, this is one of those changes we could actually have.
Yeah, amen. Congressman Mark Pocan with us. We'll be back with more of your calls for the Congressman right after this. Here on the Thom Hartmann Program. It's Middays with Mark. He is the co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus. And George in Atlanta, Georgia. George, thanks for listening to Sirius XM. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Thank you, Tom and Congress, for taking my call. Congressman, I have a question. What do you think about the U.S. cutting ties with the Federal Reserve and bringing back gold as the backing currency for the U.S.? And if they did that, would it hurt the economy or would it help the economy? And also the bonus question, will the Progressive Democratic support Nancy as the Speaker of the House? Thank you.
And I missed the name on that second question. I'm sorry.
Nancy Pelosi.
Oh, okay. I got you. To the first question, George, I'll be honest. I haven't put a tremendous amount of thought to it, so I don't have an answer that I think that'd be worthy to offer right now. On the second question, I think what we're trying to do is be laser focused on November. We need to pick up 24 seats to get the majority. Generally, I've said that there are 70 competitive districts in this country because of gerrymandering. We're actually running competitively in 110 right now, so we've got lots of possibilities. We're doing this. Our first goal is to get the majority because I've seen the devastation that's happened since Republicans have been in control. And then we'll figure out the next steps at that point. But honestly, I think every time we look at a shiny object that's not getting past that November finish line with elections across the country, it takes us away from doing our very best to take back that majority. And I think that's where, as a progressive caucus, we've tried to focus our time. And, should there be this situation where we're back in the majority, there's going to be at least one new leadership position. We're looking to make sure that progressives are going to be a part of that. We're having some conversations about that.
Great. Jim in Orlando, West Virginia. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan.
Hello. Thank you, Mr. Hartmann. Thank you, Mr. Pocan. You all helped save the benefits to 250,000 vets that the Trump administration and Republicans was getting ready to chop their legs out from under them, and you saved them. Now, we've got another very serious problem going on. The Koch brothers, Charlie and David Koch, are trying to destroy the VA hospitals. They're trying to shut them all down and make us go to private physicians. Now, this is not going to work because they do not know how to handle us. I'm a 71-year-old Vietnam veteran. I get my health care at the VA hospitals. They take very, very good care of me, and they've, I'd say, saved my life. So you hear these people saying the VA hospitals are no good. They don't know what they're talking about. So, Mr. Pocan, please stop these Koch brothers from killing our VA hospitals. Their daddy was, I consider, a treason. He went to Russia and built them plants and things that they used against the United States during the Cold War. That's how they made their trillions. They're traitors. Please help us, and thank you.
Yeah. So, Jim, you're dead on that. The Koch brothers are behind this scheme to try to privatize the VA. Is every VA across the country the best facility? No. And that's why they have constant improvements to do that. The facilities in Wisconsin, especially in Madison, in my district, is one of the best. We even do transplants and everything there. I get nothing but positive comments. And when a problem does bubble up, they're very responsive, and we can intercede at that point. But the answer is not to try to privatize it, but that's what the Koch brothers want. The good news is a lot of veterans around the country, just like yourself, Jim, are saying the exact same thing to their members of Congress. And while there is some money that's gone to the choice program under the guise of making sure that care is accessible for veterans, even if you're not near a VA facility, we've been able to hold back the widening of that program to a point that it really would be getting closer to privatization. So thank you for what you're doing, and all the other veterans. It's important you speak out and talk to your members of Congress and the Senate about this.
Nick in Yorkville, Illinois. You're on the air with Congressman Pocan. We have 2 minutes to the end of the hour.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Thanks, Congressman Pocan. Love listening to you. My friend lives up in your district by the Pick and Save. It's love the cheese area over there. But real quick, so we want to take as you said, the momentum is to take Congress, but if we take it and don't deliver anything, 2020 could be a disaster. And so, is there a potential that we may have to make a deal with the devil and talk to Trump and say, look, you can go down in history, look like the Saskatchewan guy from Canada who ended up getting them all
Tommy Douglas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, thanks a lot.
Sure. Thanks, Nick. Hey, I think, if we take the majority, the best chances in the House. If it's a big blue wave, we could also take back the Senate, but I think that may be just a little bit tougher. So no matter what, there's going to be potential other things that are going to make it hard to get some of our agenda done. I think what's important for us is to at least put those things out there, vote on them, and show the public what the alternative is. But at the same time, I'll give you one example on infrastructure. If Donald Trump really believes what he says on the top line of infrastructure, he has a terrible funding for how to do it, we would work with him, and we would find ways to put real money out there. So I think, we're going to move anything forward that we need to that's good for the American people, but we're also going to show that contrast. And I think at the end of the day, when people get a chance to see that there is an alternative, that's going to be the most effective in us taking seats back in November.
Congressman, what should we be looking for in the week coming up?
So it's a week, at least on the House side, we're back in district. So I just would say it's a great opportunity that if you want to have a face-to-face with your member of Congress, if they're maybe doing a town hall or doing some other public event, go and talk to them about whatever you're watching most closely. And I would say make one of those issues to sign the discharge petition on the net neutrality bill. Let's make sure the Internet's free and open for everyone.
So do you think that that's going to pass in the House, that net neutrality?
Yeah, I'll tell you, based on, I had nearly 13,000 contacts against the decision in my district and 0 for it. Based on that, I know that's what other members are getting. It should, but the telecom industry has got a lot of lobbyists and a lot of money, so we have to fight that, and people have to get in their members' faces and ask them to sign that petition.
Okay, yeah, they're spreading a lot of money around. Congressman Mark Pocan, thanks so much for being with us.
Absolutely, thank you.
Great talking with you. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com. Today we're reading from Requiem for the American Dream, The 10 Principles of Concentration of Wealth and Power by Noam Chomsky. Brand new book. From the preface, a note on the American Dream. During the Great Depression, which I'm old enough to remember, it was bad, much worse objectively than today. But there was a sense that we'll get out of this somehow, an expectation that things are going to get better. Maybe we don't have jobs today, but they'll be coming back tomorrow and we can work together for a brighter future. This was a time of a lot of political radicalism that would hopefully lead to a different future, one with more justice, equality, and freedom. Breaking down repressive class structures, and so on. There was just a general sense that this will work out somehow. Most of my family, for instance, were unemployed working class. The rise of the union movement itself was a reflection of, and a source of, optimism and hopefulness. And that's missing today. Today, there's a general feeling that nothing's coming back. It's over. The American dream, like most dreams, has large elements of myth to it. Part of the 19th century dream was the Horatio Alger story. We're dirt poor, but we're going to work hard and we'll find a way out of it, which was true to an extent. Take my father, who came in 1913 from a very poor village in Eastern Europe. He was able to get a job in a sweatshop in Baltimore and gradually work himself up to the point where he could go to college, get a degree, and finally even a PhD. He ended up living what's called a middle-class lifestyle. A lot of people could do that. It was possible for immigrants from Europe in the early days to achieve a level of wealth, privilege, freedom, and independence that wouldn't have been imaginable in their countries of origin. But now we simply know that that's not true anymore. Social mobility, in fact, is lower here than it is in Europe. But the dream persists, fostered by propaganda. You hear it in every political speech. Vote for me, you'll get the dream back. They all reiterate it in similar words. You even hear it from people who are destroying the dream, whether they know it or not. But the dream has to be sustained. Otherwise, how are you going to get people in the richest, most powerful country in world history with extraordinary advantages to face the reality that they see around them? Inequality is really unprecedented. If you look at total inequality now, it's like the worst periods of American history. But if you refine it more closely, the inequality comes from the extreme wealth in a tiny sector of the population, a fraction of the 1%. There were periods like the Gilded Age in the 1890s and the Roaring '20s and so on, when a situation developed rather similar to this. But the current period is extreme. Because if you look at the wealth distribution, the inequality comes mostly from super wealthy. Literally, the top 0.1% are just super wealthy. This is the result of over 30 years of a shift in social and economic policy. If you check, you find that over the course of these years, the government policy has been modified completely against the will of the population to provide enormous benefits to the very rich. And for most of the population, the majority, real incomes have almost stagnated for over 30 years. The middle class, in that sense, that unique American sense, is under severe attack. A significant part of the American dream is class mobility. You're born poor, you work hard, you get rich. The idea that it's possible for everyone to get a decent job, buy a home, get a car before their children go to school, and have their children go to school, it's all collapsed. Take a look at American society. Imagine yourself looking down from Mars. What do you see? In the United States, there are professed values like democracy. In a democracy, public opinion is going to have some influence on policy, and then the government carries out actions determined by the population. That's what democracy means. It's important to understand that privileged and powerful sectors have never liked democracy, and for very good reasons. Democracy puts power into the hands of the general population and takes it away from the privileged and powerful. It's a principle of concentration of wealth and power. Concentration of wealth yields concentration of power, particularly so as the cost of elections skyrockets, which forces the political parties even more deeply into the pockets of major corporations. This political power quickly translates into legislation that then increases the concentration of wealth. So fiscal policy, like tax policy, deregulation, rules of corporate governance, and a whole variety of measures, political measures designed to increase the concentration of wealth and power, yields more political power to do the same thing. And that's what we've been seeing. So we have this kind of vicious cycle in progress. I mean, the wealthy always did have an inordinate amount of control over policy. Actually, that goes back centuries. It's so traditional that it was described by Adam Smith in 1776. You read the famous Wealth of Nations. He says in England, quote, "The principal architects of policy are the people who own the society." In his day, in Adam Smith's day, merchants and manufacturers. And they make sure that their own interests are very well cared for, however grievous the impact on the people of England or others. Now, it's not merchants and manufacturers, it's financial institutions and multinational corporations. The people who Adam Smith called the masters of mankind, and they're following the vile maxim, all for ourselves and nothing for anyone else. They're just going to pursue policies that benefit them and harm everyone else. Well, that's a pretty general maxim of politics that's been studied closely in the United States. Those are the policies that have increasingly been followed. And in the absence of a general popular reaction, that's pretty much what you'd expect. Then we get into principle number 1, reduce democracy. And, he goes through his 10 principles. The book, Requiem for the American Dream.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And on the line with us, our old friend Mike Papantonio, America's lawyer. Mike, welcome back to the program. And
good to be here, Tom.
Yeah. So what? Give me a what are you guys up to right now? It seems to me that there's this this opioid epidemic that is just ravishing our country, and I know you guys have been working on some of these things as attorneys. What's the situation?
Yeah, well, we're one of the law firms that have been asked to be involved in the national litigation up in Cleveland, Ohio, where this is all. And my focus is on the distributors like McKesson, Amerisource, Cardinal. See, all the attention right now is on the manufacturers, Purdue, but it's really the distributors that were the real pill pushers. Their conduct is abhorrent. I mean, I've seen bad conduct over the years, but here they understood that they could make quick money by addicting a lot of people to the point now that we have, I think it's 170 people every day die in America because of addiction to opioids. And it wasn't an accident at all, Tom. As a matter of fact, when we start looking at the documents we're looking at right now, it was almost as if once they saw that the epidemic was in place, they started internalizing the epidemic into their business plan. In other words, they started seeing pill mills that were popping up, and they would wait a year, 2 years to close, to even participate in stopping their product from going to those pill mills. There's situations where you would have 2 pharmacies that were no more than 3 blocks away, and they would sell 9 million pills to each one of those pharmacies, and the population in the town would be 400, 500 people. So that is a pretty typical kind of story. If you look at West Virginia alone, there's 1.8 million people. They sold 800 million pills in that state alone. And so they knew what they were doing. I mean, they were simply legitimized pill pushers. And now they're trying to blame it on, the doctors are responsible. The doctors weren't responsible. These companies phonied up literature to make the doctors, actually gave it to the doctors, pitched it to the doctors by their salespeople, telling those doctors that, this is a different kind of OxyContin, this is a different kind of opioid, and people won't become addicted to it. So it's an ugly story. The congressional hearings took place a couple of weeks ago. I actually testified in front of the staff. I had a meeting with the staff members of that committee before those hearings took place. And fortunately, there were a couple of representatives that did a very good job asking tough questions to these folks that believe they're bulletproof. They had 4 or 5 CEOs there, in their suits, it's just another day of business, and they raised their hands and swore to tell the truth. I've read the congressional record. I've never seen so much perjury take place in one place.
That's remarkable.
Except tobacco. I saw the same thing happen with the tobacco wars.
Yeah. We're talking with Mike Papantonio, America's lawyer. He's the attorney. He's the host of Ring of Fire Radio. He is the host of his, I think it's America's Lawyers, the name of the TV show, right, on RTTV?
Yeah.
And author of the new legal thriller Law and Vengeance. It's a sequel to Law and Disorder. TROfire.com, the website. You can tweet him at Ring of Fire Radio. Pap, I was reading a kind of a history of this the other day, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection is that OxyContin was brought to market in 1998, and at that point in time, we really didn't have an opiate epidemic in this country. Over the next few years, these guys came up with Purdue Pharmaceuticals specifically, I guess it is, came up with a very specific way of getting these pills out there by marketing them directly to doctors. And as the evidence started coming in that addiction rates were skyrocketing, what happened?
Well, what happened was the distributors, again, yes, Purdue manufactured it. But the distributors are the ones that made billions of dollars. I mean, McKesson is worth $330 billion, Tom.
Who's McKesson?
A lot of that happened because of, their opioid business. And the same way with Cardinal. These are multi-billion-dollar businesses. So we focus on Purdue, but it's really the distributors that are most responsible. Look, Tom, they had salespeople on the ground. They had a salesperson would be on 3rd Street in Huntington, West Virginia. There would be 4 pill mills on streets that were no more than 3 or 4 miles from the distributor, from the salesperson. She would drive past those pill mills every day, and we have pictures of people standing outside the pill mills at 8 o'clock in the morning in their pajamas waiting to get pills. The distributor would also see pill mills being closed down by the feds and by the local police, so they knew exactly what was happening. They were the ones supplying the pill mills. So to say that, to have these CEOs appear in front of Congress and act like they're bulletproof and they've got clean hands was laughable. It was absolutely laughable. And so I'm the one that's, along with a great team of trial lawyers, that are going to be taking the depositions of these CEOs. And the deposition of these CEOs are going to look very different when we take their depositions than they did in these congressional hearings. I would recommend they lawyer up. Let me put it like that.
Yeah. When you say pill mills, are you talking about basically doctors' offices that are prescribing to people who are actually in pain, but they're prescribing, over-prescribing or prescribing medicines that are way too strong? Or are you talking about, I remember back when I was in high school, there was one doctor in town that everybody knew. If you went to and you said, I'm having a hard time staying awake in class, he'd write you a prescription for Dizoxin, which was that generation's version of methamphetamine. And all the girls I knew went to him for birth control pills, because this was back, the 60s, and it was still, kind of sketchy. And he was just a corrupt doctor. I mean, are we talking about bad docs, or are we talking about criminal enterprises?
No, you're talking about criminal enterprises. We have them sued for RICO. I've sued these companies for RICO. They had what they call an opioid express, Tom, that operated all the way from Massachusetts to South Florida, and they understood that these distributors knew exactly how it would work. They would sell 6.5 million pills every year, say, for example, to a town where there were like 15,000 people. Well, they knew that the numbers were staggering. I mean, 50, 60, 70 pills for every man, woman, child in town.
So it wasn't just the people in that town who were taking those pills.
No, they understood that it was they could see the chain. If you look at a map and you looked at where they dumped, they first of all, they would find areas where there's areas of despair, where people are jobless, times are hard. They would look at how many these towns that had anytime you see hospitals and a lot of pharmacies in a small town, there's probably economic problems in that area. They would actually go to those because it's an economic indicator. So they would go to these areas where there's despair, coal mine areas, places where they used to have steel manufacturing, and that were closing down. They would center in those places. And there was actually an opioid express that operated all the way from New York all the way down the East Coast, and people would make those drives. And the industry knew what was going on. They had heard the term opioid express many, many times. And it was actually set up to where they could stop town to town, and these third parties would just buy pills from these doctors at these pill mills and just spread them out all over the country. They're nothing. It was no different than a cartel. I mean, they didn't look like Mexican cartel, but they were, and so they just had this in place, and that's part of what we're going to show in trial. I'll be trying this case next year, probably towards the end of next year.
The new American drug cartel. And before we wrap this up, we're talking with Mike Papantonio, America's lawyer. Where can people learn more about this on the internet?
Well, the best thing I could recommend is that they read a book called Dreamland. It is a brilliant book, Tom. It is an absolute brilliant book. But if you just want some basic details, I mean, it's literally all over the internet now after the congressional hearings, and where we're finding out, we're making comparisons to what these folks testified to and what was the truth. It's as I said, it's almost laughable.
Remarkable. Mike Papantonio, attorney, host of Ring of Fire Radio, his TV program, America's Lawyer, author of the new legal thriller, Law and Vengeance. His previous book is brilliant, too, Law and Disorder. They're both great reads. If you like, John Grisham-style novels, pick them up. TRO Fire, as in theringofire.com, TRO Fire. Thank you, Pap.
Thank you, Tom.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Aaron, watching Free Speech TV in South Bend, Washington. Aaron, you're on the air.
Hi, Tom. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I am feeling very sad today because I watched the documentary on Obama's last year, and you know I've been watching MSNBC for over a year now, and you just get hooked into it and you get mad. But now I'm just feeling sad because Obama had some good ethics, and we had kindness, and now it's falling apart.
I don't know anything about this documentary, Aaron. Tell me about it.
Well, it was on HBO, and it was called the Last Year,
mm-hmm.
and it went into what they tried to do, and they almost had a peace thing with Syria, and that blew up, of course, when Trump got elected. But all the work that he did for 8 years seems to be gone.
Oh, they're trying to wipe it off the face of the map. They want to make sure that America's first black president has absolutely zero legacy.
I know, but what bothered me is I was thinking, well, that's wrong, and he was right. That's not how I feel. I get mad sometimes when I listen to Trump, but I don't feel sad. But this made me feel so sad, because of what's happening to our country, and I don't know what else to do except get out and vote. And I'm part of the resistance thing, and
and wake up all your friends. Aaron, was the protagonist in this documentary, and I'm going to have to check it out this weekend. I'm sure Louise and I will have time to watch it on HBO. But the protagonist, obviously, is Obama and his administration. Who are the bad guys? Who are the antagonists? Is it the Koch brothers? Is it the Republicans generically? Is it leadership? Who is it?
I don't really know. It didn't really say that. It just showed how they were doing up to the last day, and then their shock when Trump got elected.
And they talked about Merrick Garland and all that kind of stuff?
No, they didn't talk about this.
Oh, so this was not about Republican obstruction. This was just about the good things they were trying to do? Yeah, and then how it now, Right.
And he was so warm, and he'd hug people. I mean, I've never even seen Trump laugh, let alone hug people.
Yeah.
And it just made me so sad, and I'm still going to listen because I want to know what's going on. But I think we're getting just inundated with this stuff, and it's affecting us.
Yeah. Aaron, when you talk to your friends about this, what kind of feedback are you getting? Do you have a sense that this is a solvable problem, or are we in a?
We're kind of a small community, and for a small community, we're pretty good. We have a lot of problems with the ice because we have the workers in the oyster and the fish,
mm-hmm.
and they really go after them. And we've I don't know what we can do except report it when we see it.
Report what?
Report that they're going through. You can.
Warn people that ICE is coming. You mean?
Yeah. Because I believe we have a sheriff that is implicit with all this.
Yeah. A lot of them are. They love the whole Trump authoritarian thing. Aaron, thanks for sharing your story with us, and thanks for watching Free Speech TV. Very nice to hear from you.
Keep going.
I'll do my very best. Thank you, Aaron.
Thank
Good talking with you. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann here with you. There's a fair amount in the news today, and I'll get to some of that after the bottom of the hour. But Sam in Jacksonville, Florida, you wanted to jump in on the opioids topic. Sam, what's up?
Hey, my friend, she's from Stark, Florida, and the sheriff, well, they have a Russian doctor there, that was busloads of people were coming in and going into her office and getting opioids.
Literally busloads?
Literally busloads.
Wow.
They would be from Virginia, North Carolina.
Take a
wherever.
bus to Florida to get drugs?
That's what she said.
Wow.
And then they would go right down the road to the pharmacy, and it'd take all day. They would, one by one go in and get their opioids and come back out. Well, the sheriff there knew about what was going on, and when she asked him about it, he said that she was federally protected and could not be arrested.
Well, I guess, if you're a pharmacy and you're not breaking the law, even if people from out of state are coming to buy your products, you would think that somebody has to exercise discretion in these things, though. Excuse me, Sam, I interrupted you.
Well, she's not in business there anymore. She's in Gainesville.
She is the pharmacist?
Yeah.
Yeah.
She's a Russian pharmacist doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And it kind of reminds me when you were talking the other day about how.
Wait a minute, you mean you go in and you see her and she is the doctor, she prescribes for you, and then she fills her own prescriptions?
No. She would write the prescriptions and they'd go right down the road to the pharmacy.
Oh, I see. So she's the doc. Okay, got it.
But I just thought it was, that's how these opioids, I think, get to these northern states. But it's kind of ironic, too, that you were talking the other day about the Chinese and their fentanyl.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a Russian doctor, and they're prescribing opioids. But, if this lady was federally protected, it would seem like that would be in legislation somewhere. I mean, the sheriff said he knew what was going on, but he couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah. Well, as a local official, probably he couldn't do anything about it, but the Food and Drug Administration certainly could, and the medical licensing boards certainly could. So there are remedies for this, Sam. It's apparently your local sheriff just doesn't want to engage in them, and that might be because this activity is bringing a lot of money into the community, which is probably helping to pay his paycheck. Although I don't know. I mean, I'm just speculating. But Sam, thanks for sharing that story with us. We all need to look more into this. Bob in Burlington, Vermont. Hey, Bob, what's on your mind today?
Two things, Tom. I'll follow up on the opioid thing. It wasn't that long ago, a couple of years, that if you walked into the hospital and had back surgery, you could walk out with street value number of Oxycontins that would, really cause you real. Now they've changed the law here anyway, so that you're limited to prescribing for only a couple of days, then you go to another doctor. But it was pretty widespread and eye-opening when you found out about it.
Well, I had back surgery a year and a half ago in D.C., and when I left the hospital, I had 30, 40 tablets, but it wasn't these 10, 20, 30 milligram Oxycontins. They were 5 milligram tablets of some kind of painkiller, but it was. It was not knocking me on my butt. I did my radio show on that stuff, for a week or so. It reduced the pain.
I remember
but
some of those days.
Go ahead.
I'm talking a couple of hundred.
Wow.
Particularly people when you live in a rural area where people don't have necessarily immediate access to a pharmacy, you get a bigger script because you're not going to be able to drive to the place. So that I guess was the logic. But the question that I originally got into queue for was when Mark was on, it reminded me that I had not heard of the resolution. I know he had offered the number 2 guy in the FBI a couple of days worth of work to get across his pension threshold. Whatever happened with him? Whatever happened with that objectionable situation where he basically lost a lot of his retirement benefit because Trump axed him?
Right, and I've got Chris Ray's name stuck in my head. I'm drawing a blank on the name of the guy who apparently you are too, Bob.
Yeah, it was number 2 guy.
Yeah, we know who we're talking about. Yeah, Andrew McCabe. Thank you, Sean. And what happened was McCabe did not take Congressman Pocan up on his offer. I'm not sure exactly.
There were several, weren't there?
There were several, yes, you're right. And I'm not sure exactly what he's doing, but I would be astonished if he doesn't have $1 million book contract right now. And apparently the really big book to check out right now is James Clapper's book. He comes right out and says, if it wasn't for Russian interference in the election, and maybe Saudi and UAE, Donald Trump would not be president. It's amazing. Bob, thanks.
Listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
We'll be back with more of the news of the day and your calls right after this. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Seize the Time, the story of the Black Panther Party and Huey P. Newton by Bobby Seale. This is from page 85, a subchapter titled Huey Backs the Pigs Down. And there are a few words in here that I'll be filling in, as it were. They're walking, he says, one day as we were walking out of the office, I guess we'd been there about a month or so, a pig passed by. He saw us coming out of the office with shotguns and pistols on our sides. About 6 or 7 of us came out of the office there in the daytime, and we looked at the pig as he passed by, and he jumped on his radio because he saw us coming out of the office with these pieces and stuff. We had just finished field stripping weapons, learning about 00 buckshot, learning about the 9mm and the .45, and having a political education session. We had a .45 and a .357 Magnum in the group and a couple of M1s. We had 3 or 4 shotguns by then. We bought up guns like a son of a bitch then. The pig went down 2 blocks and turned around, came back up the other side of the street. They were building rapid transit, BART, right down from Grove Street there, and we went up the other side of the boulevard and came back. We readily assessed that the pigs were ready to see what the F was happening, that this pig had radioed in, and he was running it down, how he had, quote, seen some N-words come out of a place here with some guns and blop, blop, de bloop, etc., come out of this office with guns and stuff. He was radioing into other pigs to help get them. Huey had his father's car that day, and he goes through that whole thing. So anyhow, the police pull him over, and Huey got in the car, and the pig came up to the window. You have any driver's license? So Huey rolled the window down. That wasn't more than a 3 or 4 inch crack in the window. Huey handed his license out the window. Is this your true name, the pig said? And Huey said, yes, that's my true name, Huey P. Newton. Is this your true address, 841 47th Street? And Huey said, yep, that's my true address, 841 47th Street. And what are you doing with the guns? And Huey said, what are you doing with your gun? This particular pig decided he wasn't going to argue, so he went back and got his little writing pad there where they fill out S-word. Your true name is Huey P. Newton? Huey said, that's right. The pig wrote it down. Your true address is 841 47th Street? Huey said, that's right. The pig then looked at his license. What's your phone number? And Huey said, 5, and stopped and wouldn't say anything else. And the pig said, 5 what? And this is when all the S-word between the pig and the party and the pigs began. Huey said, the Fifth Amendment. You ever heard of it? Don't you know about the constitutional right of a person not to testify against himself? 5, I don't have to give you anything but my identification, name, and address, so therefore I don't even want to talk to you. You can leave my car and leave me alone. I don't even want to hear you. What do you mean, the pig said. And Huey said, just what I said. The constitutional right of any man is that he doesn't have to testify against himself. And Huey had a big M1 sitting to his right with his hand on it. I had this 9mm sitting beside me, and Huey had this M1 at his side. Huey was driving. 4 other brothers were in the back seat. One of them was Bobby Hutton. They were being quiet because Huey told them to be quiet, and the pig is going crazy. He's by himself, and Huey's got all these black N-words in the car going for the MFer. Meanwhile, while the pig is trying to get bad, 3 cars drove up behind us and 1 in the front. Some more were in the driveway. Blop, blop, blop de blue. Then another car came in front of us. A pig jumped out of the car, walked up to our car, and said through the crack in the window with a hoggish voice trying to sound intimidating, what's going on here? And Huey said, the same basic procedures that are supposed to go on. Huey rolled the window down another 5 or 6 inches. The pigs were looking at the guns in the car. Can I see that pistol there? One of the pigs said. No, you can't see it, Huey told him. I was beginning to get skeptical about what was happening because he pointed to my 9mm pistol. Huey was on probation, and if they thought that this was Huey's pistol, I didn't know this law stuff the way Huey knew it, so I moved the pistol over beside me real close. It had been lying in the middle of the seat. I said, no, you can't see it. Huey said, no, you can't see the pistol, nor this, pointing to his rifle. And you don't want to look, and I don't want you to look at it. You don't have to look at it. Is that your pistol? He asked Huey. And I said, no, it's not his pistol, it's my pistol. I said that because I was thinking the man's going to jump on Huey because he already told me about the probation law. If he gets caught with a pistol, he's burned. But if he gets caught with a rifle, the man can't mess with him because his probation officer told him he can carry a rifle or shotgun and he couldn't stop him. The pig said, can I see it or not? So Huey said to me, I'll talk. And then he said to the pig, no, you can't see the pistol. Get away from the car. We don't want you around the car, and that's all there is to it. Well, I can ask him if I can see his pistol or not, the pig says. So I says, well, you can't see my pistol. The MFers tried to get indignant. They were blabbing and oinking to each other about who in the hell we thought we were, and Constitution my ass, they're just turning it around. Then the pig said to Huey, who the hell do you think you are? Look, damn it, Huey said. He opened the car door. This is where Huey got mad. I mean, you have to imagine this N-word. He got mad because these dogs were going to carry on and they were bracing up like they were bad. Huey didn't go for this at all. Huey got very mad. He opened up the door saying, who the hell do you think you are? In the first place, this man, pointing at the pig, came up here and asked me for my license like he was citing me for a ticket or observation of some kind. This police officer is supposed to be carrying out his duty, and here you come talking about our guns? Huey put his hand around his M1 rifle and continued, we have a constitutional right to carry the guns, and anyway, I don't want to hear it. The pigs backed up a couple of steps, and Huey was coming out of the car. Huey had his hand back in the car getting his M1. And you know, if you've ever seen Huey, he gets growly but articulate. He came out of the car with his M1. Huey knows this law so well that he wouldn't have had the one M1 loaded inside the car. So he came out of the car, he dropped around into the chamber right away. Clack, clop. Who do you think you all are anyway? Huey said to the pigs. And the pigs were all on the sidewalk harassing all the brothers and sisters who gathered around. You move on down the street, said the pig. Huey started interrupting. You don't have to move down the street. Don't go anywhere. These pigs can't keep you from observing. You have a right to observe an officer carrying out his duty. And these pigs, they listen to all this S-word, and it goes on from there. It's a great story. Seize the Time by Bobby Seale. It's your media support group for We the People. Thom Hartmann here with you. Talk media for the sane among us. Linda in Long Island, New York, you wanted to talk about the opiate crisis, Linda?
Yes, I do, actually. You know, it's a personal story of, like so many mothers, so many parents, so many friends, children of opiate users, and I, some years ago, discovered that there is an actual cure for heroin, opiate addiction, and I stumbled upon it doing a tremendous amount of research, and it saved my son's life, and it's called Ibogaine, I-B-O-G-A-I-N-E. It comes from the iboga plant in Africa, and it can be, people can research it, and my son had taken it, had gone to Mexico, and it saved his life. And my son today is just doing incredibly well. He's in a startup. He's a software engineer, and it's really quite incredible. So I think it's something that you should look into, and so should your readers who are grappling with this problem.
Is this available as a pharmaceutical or as an herb? Or
No, it's a plant. It's a plant. It comes from the iboga plant.
Right.
It comes from Africa, and there's a particular tribe, the Bwiti tribe, use it for, religious, spiritual purposes.
Mm.
But it is out there. There's a tremendous amount. There's a wealth of information about it.
Yeah, I'm familiar with the name. I read about it years ago, but I don't. My recollection was that it binds opiate receptors, and so it gives you that kind of, it diminishes the withdrawal symptoms or even eliminates them, and gives you a little bit of the feeling, that well-being feeling that opiates give you, but it's not itself addictive, and it doesn't cause the body to grow new opiate receptors, which then kind of throws you into a lifelong craving for the drug kind of thing. Do I have that right?
Yes, that is absolutely correct. I mean, we went through the gamut from, methadone and Suboxone before we came upon this. And, I mean, it should be used in conjunction with going to therapy. It's not, in and of itself.
Is it legal in the United States?
It does work. I beg your pardon?
Is it legal in the United States?
It is not. It'll never become legal in this country. They have done studies on it in Florida. you can really look into it. The pharmaceutical industry will never allow this
Sure.
to become legal here.
Yeah. But you can get it in Mexico?
You can get it in Mexico. You can get it in other parts of Europe. It's available. There are underground networks in this country that, you have to be very careful, of course, because there are providers like anywhere else that can abuse it and not know what they're doing with it.
Sure.
But my son is a tremendous, he's part of a group of people that, he's on a Facebook page with other people who are involved in the Ibogaine movement. And
Remarkable.
he's yes, it's really quite remarkable. It is incredible. And I know one day I think that whatever he's going to do, even though he's a software engineer, he writes code and he's in the intellectual sphere right now. I think someday he will do something that will somehow bridge the gap between trying to make this possibly legal in this country. I don't really know how, with the pharmaceutical industry not allowing this to happen.
Yeah. Well, they're not fans of anything that comes from a plant that they can't lock down and patent and all that kind of stuff because, hey, they're all about making money, which is all the more the tragedy. Linda, thanks for sharing your story with us, and thank you very much. I appreciate it. Chuck in St. Petersburg, Florida. Hey, Chuck, you wanted to talk about opiates too?
Yes, sir. I can't remember the channel that Al Gore had that was bought out, and they did a documentary.
Current TV?
Yes, exactly. And they did a documentary, it was about 8 or 9 years ago, and I lived in South Florida at the time, and I used to see hundreds of people lined up around all the places. I knew what was going on. It was called the Pillbilly Express. All flights from Huntington, West Virginia were booked to Fort Lauderdale round trip. As soon as they hit the ground, they were taken by taxis to buy their pills and straight back to the airport to fly back to distribute it among the Trump base. All the pill poppers. Oh, yeah. And Lexington, Kentucky, and Nashville, Tennessee, all to Fort Lauderdale.
Is this how Limbaugh was getting his drugs?
And what's that?
Is this how Limbaugh was getting his drugs? I thought he had to buy them from his maid.
He used to be on the air. He used to talk about Rush Limbaugh and how, his was just delivered to his home right there on the island of Palm Beach.
Yeah.
I lived there. I knew what went on.
Yeah.
Also, you must remember who got all the kickbacks from Big Pharma, our filthy governor, Prick Scott. And because when he, that was part of that $1.75 billion Medicare scam settlement. And here he wants to be our senator now.
Yeah.
I want to know why he's not in prison.
Well, didn't Rick Scott's company, wasn't his company convicted of the largest Medicare fraud in the history of the United States?
Yes, it was. He paid the
and now he wants to be a senator.
That's right. He's a career Trump criminal.
Amazing. Amazing. Okay, Chuck, thanks for testifying. Thanks for the call. Al in Wayne, New Jersey. Hey, Al, what's on your mind?
Hi, how you doing?
Great. What's up?
I'm sorry to change the subject, but I just want to find out why the NRA has a tax-exempt status.
Because they incorporated as a 501c3 as a charitable organization. They also have a foundation, a 501c4, I believe it is, that engages in political activity. But pretty much anyone can do this. All you have to, the main difference is that you have to say that you're doing it for education or social purposes, and you don't have a fund balance. In other words, you can carry money over from year to year. Excuse me, you do have a fund balance rather than a profit, but you can't call it profit. You can't distribute the money to the stockholders or the board of directors outside of salary, and that's how it works.
Right. There's no way to change that, right? I mean, basically they're like donating money to the politicians.
Yeah. Now, I think if you made the NRA, if you were to say that the NRA could no longer be nonprofit, there'd probably be a lot of organizations that are basically, fraternal groups, the Moose, the Elks, the VFW, things like that, that would also lose their tax-exempt status. I believe that my opinion is, and I'm very familiar with this world. Back in 1978, I actually wrote the application to the Internal Revenue Service. It took me months to learn how to do this and really dig into it, but we couldn't afford a lawyer to create the Community for Abused Kids in New Hampshire that Louise and I started in late '78, and it took about a year and it got approved, and I learned the process. And it's not that complicated. I do think that we need to tighten up who can be 501c3, and I'm very opposed to churches being tax exempt. I think that monasteries should be tax exempt, but I don't believe that churches that are open to the public should be tax exempt. And I say that as a guy who was the minister of a church for 2 years, and I'm an ordained minister, but I still think that it's very problematic. With regard to the NRA, I think that any organization that is engaging in lobbying activity, or activity that tries to alter legislation, which the NRA is definitely doing, should probably fall under some other category and should probably lose their tax-exempt status. But right now, the laws don't provide for that, Al.
Okay. All right. Thanks a lot for your
Yeah. Thanks a lot for the call. Ron in Douglas, Georgia. Hey, Ron.
Hello. How are you?
Good.
The last caller was talking about the NRA as being tax exempt.
Mm-hmm.
Well, is not Planned Parenthood also?
Yeah, the difference between the NRA and Planned Parenthood, the NRA, at least when I was an NRA member, I let my membership lapse in 2008 or 2009. 2008 was the last card I got. But back when I joined in the 90s, I went through the Georgia Police Academy and all this stuff, and they were offering classes, gun safety classes and shooting classes and things. I don't know if they're still doing that or not. If they are, that's probably a legitimate tax-exempt function. Planned Parenthood actually provides health care and health services to people, which is absolutely a legitimate tax-exempt function. It's what hospitals do, and it's what doctors, although most doctors' offices are not tax-exempt, but yeah. So I'm not sure I understand your objection.
Planned Parenthood kills millions of babies a year.
So I get you're opposed to abortion, but
No, I'm not opposed to abortion. No, sir. I believe that's a woman's right to choose her choice. But I am opposed to the left always blaming everything on the NRA. The NRA kills people. No, they don't. It's the idiot behind the gun that kills people. That gun will sit there all day long, not hurt a soul.
But the idiot behind the gun would not be killing people if he didn't have the gun.
The idiot would find another means to kill people. Look at the people that run over them with cars.
Sure, absolutely, and I guarantee you that an idiot in a hotel room in Las Vegas with a car or with a knife is not going to injure 400 people and kill 58 of them. It takes a gun to do that, Ron. Ron, guns are made to kill people and other things, very simply. And if you look at, Trump went off on this last week. There was, some crazed killer in, I think it was France, who killed one person and tried to kill 3 others with a knife. If that guy had an AR-15, he would have taken out 30 people. That's a reality. So, spare me your tears. Charles, I'm sorry, we're hitting the break here. Charles will pick you up on the other side of the break. It's coming up on 15 minutes before the hour. We are going to check in with Talk Media News in just a few minutes. And what a day! What all is going on? Oh, I want to get to this banking legislation that Congressman Pocan was talking about too. Get ready. The next big crash has just been made inevitable.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Back with more of the news of the day, your calls, and Talk Media News right after this. And welcome back. John in Philadelphia. Hey, John, what's on your mind today?
The caller was just calling about 501Cs and the tax-exempt status around that.
Yeah.
And my thought on that is that if you're going to become a 501C, the people in your organization should have a maximum wage. If you're going to avoid taxation for your, whatever the club is, whether it's that would, affect the Elks, as you mentioned, or the Moose, but it would also affect people like Little Peter at the NRA or
the Red Cross. I mean, a lot of us were shocked when we discovered that who was the wife of the Speaker of the House of Representatives? Bob Dole, Elizabeth Dole, Bob Dole's wife, was made head of the Red Cross and was pulling, as I recall, and I might be wrong on this, but my recollection was she was pulling down $700 grand a year, running the Red Cross, and it's like that would save a hell of a lot of lives. And
how many people in Haiti could have used that?
Yeah, exactly. And she took a lot of flack for that, but I'm guessing the Red Cross is still probably paying very, very good because they're having to compete with the private sector, which brings us to this larger issue of absurd and obscene salaries in general, and not just in nonprofits, but right across the board. All that used to be under control prior to the Reagan administration by a top tax rate of 74%. After you made your first couple million a year, you said, hey, it's crazy to give 74% of my income to the government. I'll just put it back into the business. So I'm with you. I think that rather, though, than a percentage, another way to do it would be to do what the civil service did for years, what the military did for years, I think still does, and what universities did for years, and they just abandoned maybe a decade or so ago, which was that the most highly paid person in the organization cannot make more than 20 times, and I think in the case of civil service it was 10 times, what the most lowly paid person is paid. What do you think? Oh, he hung up. Okay. All righty. Let's see. We got 1:22. That's enough time to get a caller in here. Well, actually, I want to go off on this. Philip Roth, in fact, is the story that I would love to share with you. Philip Roth died yesterday. Philip Roth, Portnoy's Complaint, and other books. Last year, in an interview with The New Yorker, Philip Roth said Donald Trump is just a con artist. Now, Roth, I believe, lived in New York. He compared him with Lindbergh in his 2004 novel, The Plot Against America. He says Trump was, quote, humanly impoverished and ignorant of government, of history, of science, of philosophy, of art, incapable of expressing or recognizing subtlety or nuance, and destitute of all decency. This is Philip Roth, the world-famous novelist, speaking of Donald Trump. He also slammed Trump for, quote, wielding a vocabulary of 77 words that is better called jerkish than English. He also, in the New York Times in January, said Donald Trump is a massive fraud, the evil sum of his deficiencies, devoid of everything but the hollow ideology of a megalomaniac. And now we have Clapper, the former head of national security, saying that Trump wouldn't even be president if it wasn't for a coordinated effort with foreign governments, including Russia, to make Trump president, which is pretty spooky stuff. We'll be right back. Ellen Ratner will be with us, Talk Media News. Stick around. Let's check in to Talk Media News and find out what's going on in the world today. This report brought to you by goatsfortheoldgoat.com and Ellen Ratner's new book, Loving What You Do, available in fine bookstores everywhere. And on the line with us is Ellen Ratner herself. Hey, Ellen, how are you?
Hi. Well, listen, first of all, I love what you say about nonprofits because that's how we feel, and we do pay a living wage, but not much more to anybody who works for us. But also, I think this just came in that a federal judge in New York, Naomi Buchwald, basically said that Trump cannot block people from his Twitter feed. That it is a public record. Yes, that just came in a few minutes ago.
Now, this applies to the real Donald Trump Twitter feed as well as the at POTUS?
I don't know about at POTUS. I'm sure it does, but she was referring to the real Donald Trump Twitter feed.
Because his argument has always been, oh, that's my private Twitter feed. It's got nothing to do with my role as president.
Well, guess what? A federal judge just said he cannot.
I wonder if that's because he just said, I hereby demand. He has used that Twitter feed to execute presidential decrees, essentially.
I have not seen her statement. I mean, this literally just came out just a few minutes ago.
Amazing.
So we don't know what's going on yet. Okay, now today at 4 p.m. Pacific, which is 7 p.m. Eastern, Stormy Daniels is getting the key to West Hollywood today, the key to the city for her work with exposing the Me Too movement and everything like that. So that is going on.
That's great.
Also, New York Times today, as well as Eastern Mideast papers, are reporting that Iran is beginning to make missiles again in the desert. As you just talked about James Clapper, he has a new book out, and he is, as you said on the air, that he is very, very concerned about the Russian interference.
Well, he goes beyond that. He comes right out and says that if it wasn't for that interference, that Donald Trump would not be president.
Right. I mean, it's really quite a book. I don't have the whole book yet, but I'm downloading it and reading it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It came out yesterday. Okay, there was a discharge petition on immigration. Actually, it hasn't been filled out. They need 218 votes. They're very, very close to getting 218 votes because many Republicans are also voting for this discharge petition. They want a vote on the DACA provision and immigration, and they are going around Speaker Paul Ryan. A discharge petition with 218 votes means that they can actually get this voted on the floor of the House.
That would be great. Because hasn't it already passed the Senate?
It did pass the Senate. That's right. So now it has to pass the House. But of course, Paul Ryan held it up, and now there is this discharge petition. They need 218 votes. They're very, very close.
Right. And a discharge petition for people who don't know what we're talking about basically takes the speaker. Right now, Paul Ryan, the Speaker of the House, can block any legislation from coming to the floor for a vote. But with a discharge petition, if a majority of members, which would be 218 members, if a majority of the members say, sign this petition and say, bring it to a vote, then the Speaker of the House has no say in it. It goes around him and it forces a vote, and then he's stuck with it.
That's absolutely correct. Now, yesterday, Arizona education officials basically took out all references in science and other texts to evolution. So
where?
And if you live in Arizona and you're growing up as a kid in Arizona, you're not going to hear about evolution.
So how do you expect to have a career in biology or any of the hard sciences if you don't even understand how evolution works?
I have no idea. It's quite staggering in 2018.
It is.
You're hearing about this. I mean, I just can't even believe that.
That's pathetic.
It is pathetic. Yesterday, the Right to Try bill passed the House. Now, many people are against it. This means that if you're dying and you want to try an experimental drug that has not been approved of by the FDA, you can do that.
And that passed or got blocked? I'm sorry, I missed something.
I'm sorry?
Did that pass? Did it get blocked? What's the status of that?
The Right to Try bill passed the House, yes.
Okay. All right. There's a real vigorous debate on this. I've been following in some of the science journals that I subscribe to, where some people are saying, hey, this is just going to be a boon for the pharmaceutical companies. They're going to start using desperate and dying people as guinea pigs on a whole variety of drugs that maybe even the majority of which are just going to ruin people's lives and shorten their lives and kill them and put them in pain and misery. And then there are other people who are saying, yeah, but there are some drugs that actually look like they might be miracle cures, and why should we wait 4 years? There's a real vigorous debate about this.
Right. The president, right before he left for New York today, said that he thinks that James Comey has got a lot of problems. That's what he said
Right.
before he left. Okay, yesterday were primaries in several red states. Stacey Abrams, which be, if she got through it, would be the first African-American woman governor, and that was Georgia. She doesn't know who she's going up against because I think it's July 24th. There is a runoff, so that is going on. Governor Abbott is now going against Lupe Valdez. She is a lesbian, and she's the Dallas sheriff. And Amy McGrath is a former fighter pilot, and she will be going against Congressman Andy Barr.
Right, and her commercials pointed out that when she was 13 years old, Mitch McConnell told her, "You can't become a fighter pilot, don't even try." And she became the nation's first fighter pilot in that particular plane, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's so cool. That is just like Jolene, you know, with the, I guess she was second, but with the spy planes. Your wife.
Yes, it's not a fighter plane, it's a spy plane.
Yeah, there you go. Ellen Ratner with Talk Media News. Thanks so much, Ellen.
Thank you.
Have a great afternoon, a great holiday weekend.
Thank you. You too.
Thanks.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
From UN.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by X-Chair, the X-Chair office chair. xchairthom.com is the website, xchairthom.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. The Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally. For more information, call 800-223-8242 or visit tomsbeets.com. It's the Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Screwed, The Undeclared War Against the Middle Class, by me. This is chapter 1, titled There Is No, quote, free, end quote, market. Look at history and you'll find that the middle class was the creation of liberal democracies. George Washington and Thomas Jefferson did not fight a bloody war to create a country only for wealthy property holders. Our founders believed that every Bob Cratchit willing to work for his living should be able to earn enough to own his house and support himself and his family. That's what it means to be middle class, and part of why Jefferson put life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness into the Declaration of Independence. The founders also knew that a middle class doesn't just materialize out of thin air. That's why in the preamble to the Constitution, they wrote that one purpose of government was to, quote, promote the general welfare. 2 centuries later, when the middle class was in danger of disappearing during the Great Depression, Franklin Roosevelt almost single-handedly created a new middle class through his New Deal policies. Roosevelt's success demonstrates that government can and must promote the general welfare because only government can create the conditions that make a middle class possible. And FDR was able to do it only because of an overwhelming majority of Americans voted for it in a relatively free and open democracy. Listen to the right-wing pundits, the people I call the cons, and they will tell you something completely different. They suggest, and some actually believe, that a middle class will naturally spring into being when the kingdoms of corporate power are freed from government restriction. The way to create goods, according to the cons, is to free the market. When business gets to do whatever it wants, they say, it will create wealth, and that wealth will trickle down to the rest of us, thus creating a middle class. The cons' belief in free markets is a bit like the old Catholic Church's insistence that the Earth is at the center of the solar system. The free market line is widely believed by those in power, and those who challenge this belief are labeled heretics. But it's wrong. Here's a headline for those cons who are masquerading as economists without having studied either economics or history. 1, there's no such thing as a free market. And 2, markets are the creations of governments. Governments provide markets with a stable currency for financial transactions. They provide a legal infrastructure and a court system to enforce the contracts that make the market possible. They provide an educated workforce through public education. And those workers showed up at their places of business after traveling on public roads, rails, and airways provided by the government. Businesses that use the free market are protected by police and fire departments provided by the government, and they send their communications from phone to email over lines that follow public rights-of-way maintained and protected by the government. And most important, the rules of the game of business are defined by the government. Any sports fan can tell you that without rules and referees, football, baseball, basketball, and hockey would be a mess. Similarly, business without rules doesn't work. In a corporate kingdom, a corptocracy, those rules are made by the businesses themselves, and they inevitably screw both the workers and the citizens. In a democracy, those rules are made by we the people, both through our elected representatives and through union negotiations with the business kings, lords, and CEOs. The cons believe that what business is business, and the government should keep its nose out of it, even when the business is run by Ebenezer Scrooge and leads to centuries of sick Tiny Tims and terrified Bob Cratchits. Talk show cons and TV talking head cons and political cons, both Republican, conservative, or middle of the road, euphemisms for corporate connected, Democrats, say that government just gets in the way of the market. They want to let the market decide our economy. Unspoken is their belief that if economic and social policy are made by the market, we don't need government, the voice and the will of the people for our domestic affairs. One of the most vocal cons, Grover Norquist, told National Public Radio's Mara Liasson in a May 25, 2001 interview, "I don't want to abolish government. I simply want to reduce it to the size where I can drag it into the bathroom and drown it in the bathtub." During the golden age of the American middle class, people routinely voted themselves tax increases to invest in new schools, better roads, higher pay for police and firefighters, and a multitude of other infrastructure and public works projects. Hospitals were owned and run by local communities, as were water and sewage systems, and in most of the United States, power plants and other public utilities as well. Taxes, by and large, were thought of as investments in civil society and community, and were routinely embraced by the majority of the middle class. Of course, people made jokes about not liking taxes, but they still knew that without taxes, there'd be no services, and people wanted those services. Ronald Reagan and his public relations machine, funded by huge corporations and wealthy people like Joseph Coors, promoted the thought virus, the meme that taxes are bad and government is bad. Reagan ran as an outsider to government, although he was a former governor of California, and even ran for re-election as president against government. Reagan put forward the point of view of the wealthy elite who felt that they were paying large sums of their vast wealth to help the little people have good schools and communities that worked. He changed laws like the Fairness Doctrine in 1986 so that sycophants like Rush Limbaugh could appear in the public airwaves with heavy corporate funding to help convince the average person that taxes were bad and government was bad. Reagan stopped enforcing the Sherman Antitrust Act, which since 1881 had held at bay the aggregation of corporate power, and the media began.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And boy, what a day. Republican, this banking bill. I mean, I mentioned I wanted to talk about the banking bill with you, and I really do. This after the crash, after 2008, 2007, 2008, after the great Bush crash, the Republican crash of the banking system, and well, it wasn't entirely Republican. A lot of the deregulation happened during the Clinton administration, although Republicans were largely in charge of Congress at that time, too. But, there was, Robert Rubin and all those guys who were hanging out with the Democrats. They were gung-ho for it. Deregulate banks, yeah. And apparently there are still some Democrats who are like gung-ho for deregulating banks. In fact, 33 of them. These House Democrats, these House Democrats, this is from an article in The Nation. These House Democrats, over commondreams.org. These House Democrats just voted for a massive rollback of the Wall Street reforms enacted after the 2008 financial crash. If one of these is your representative, you might want to ask them why. I mean, maybe they have a good reason. I've not been able to find one, but maybe they had one. Barra of California, Bishop of Georgia, Carson of Indiana, these are all Democrats, Correa of California, Costa of California, Cuellar of Texas, Davis of Illinois, Delaney of Maryland, Foster of Illinois, Gonzalez of Texas, Gottheimer of New Jersey, Hastings of Florida, Himes of Connecticut, Kind of Wisconsin, Kuster, of New Hampshire, Larson of Washington State, Lawson of Florida, Maloney of New York, Murphy of Florida, Noland of, Rick Nolan voted for this thing? That's astonishing. Nolan of Minnesota, O'Halloran of Arizona, Peters of California, Peterson of Minnesota, Rice of New York, Rochester of Pennsylvania, Schneider of Illinois, Schrader of Oregon. Yeah, Kurt Schrader here in Oregon is kind of very much a corporate Democrat. Scott of Georgia, Sewell of Alabama, Sinema of Arizona, Sauzi of New York, Vasey of Texas, and Vila of Texas. Now, I'm not a big fan of the circular firing squad, of sitting around complaining about Democrats. That said, when an actual vote happens, when people go on the record as saying, yes, I'm here with the banks instead of with the people, I think it's worth asking them why. And I guarantee you, none of these people will come on this program and explain why they voted this way. Well, I can't guarantee that, but our experience in the past is that whenever there's been one of these controversial votes and we've asked people to come on the program, Democrats or Republicans, they do not want to go on the record. They don't want to talk about this. But if you're a constituent of one of these folks, and again, this isn't a vote the bums out of office kind of thing. It's a let's let people know that we are paying attention. We want a country that works for all of us, and we want a country, it's not like the banks were desperately in need of help. They just finished their most profitable quarter in the history of the world. Probably banks in the Roman Empire weren't as profitable as banks are right now. And we're bailing them out, or we're setting up the next bailout for the next time that they do their reckless and excessive greed shtick. This was called the Economic Growth Regulatory Relief and Consumer Protection Act. And it's going to do nothing for economic growth. Relief is the wrong word to associate with regulatory. It's deregulation. It is blowing away consumer protections and blowing away protections of the United States. You recall that when Bush crashed the economy in 2007, the Fed loaned out $27 trillion. We created, the GDP of the United States is $15 trillion. We created almost 2 years worth of GDP cash out of thin air and loaned it to billionaires in Eastern European countries, to Deutsche Bank, to billionaires here in the United States, to the big banks, to giant corporations, GM Financial, General Electric, company after company after company got bailouts from the Fed. We didn't even know about it for a couple of years until Ron Paul, back when he was in the House, and Bernie Sanders got together and passed a rider to, I think it was either an omnibus bill, an omnibus budget bill, or it was the NDAA that required a one-year audit of the Fed for 2008. And that's when we discovered all these shenanigans. And this is certainly not consumer protection. This is the opposite of consumer protection. So, something to know about. This is something that I think is actually very positive. The headline, this is from the United Press International, UPI, by Sarah Shayanian. Progressive groups launch six-figure campaign to break up Facebook. A collection of left-wing groups launched a movement Monday called Freedom from Facebook, which calls for the federal government to break up the social media giant. The groups, the Content Creators Coalition, Demand Progress, Open Market Institute, Some of Us, and Move On, announced a six-figure digital advertising offensive to demand that the Federal Trade Commission break up Facebook and their subsidiaries Instagram, WhatsApp, and Messenger. This is one of the ways, by the way, that giant companies absolutely nail down their market dominance and keep small competitors out. It's a massive barrier to entry into the marketplace. And that is they do one of two things. They either buy out their competitors or they buy out new technology that could be used to enhance their product, which is what Facebook did with WhatsApp, Instagram, and Messenger. Or they simply integrate those features into their product, which is something Microsoft and Apple have been doing for years and years. Every time somebody comes out with a really cool little app that lets you, do something, Microsoft or Apple will simply build it into their operating system, and boom, that company's out of business. Now, I'm not saying they should be prevented from doing that, but there are reasonable limits on these kinds of things. The group, the coalition, said the 5 members of the Federal Trade Commission can make Facebook safe for our democracy by breaking it up, giving us the freedom to communicate across networks, and protecting our privacy. The freedom to communicate across networks is pretty important. If you're on Facebook and you see something that you want to share with somebody, you can't do it. It's a closed little universe. You're stuck inside Facebook, and that's by intent. The Alliance says it plans to run ads with messages like Facebook keeps violating your privacy, break it up, and Mark Zuckerberg has a scary amount of power, we need to take it back. It's remarkable stuff. I think Facebook actually, when AT&T got broken up into 6 companies, 5 Baby Bells and Lucent Technologies, what used to be called Bell Labs, there was actually an increase in shareholder value. If you owned AT&T stock and that stock got replaced with the stock of these 6 new companies, you actually made out well from that. And it produced an explosion of innovation. After AT&T got broken up, just an explosion of innovation that led to the cellular explosion and the internet. And I believe that putting some reasonable limits on the size of Facebook, I'm not talking about killing the company by any stretch of the imagination, but putting some reasonable limits on it, and a similar would be a good thing for Facebook. I think it would be a good thing for Facebook stockholders, and it would certainly be a good thing for its users. And it's not going to diminish Mark Zuckerberg's billions and the hundreds of millions and billions of dollars that his buddies have made off this thing. Another really interesting thing around the internet and privacy is a suggestion which is growing, which is that no company, whether it's Google or Facebook or there's dozens of others, that no company can keep your private information for more than 6 months. If you shoplift and you don't get caught, there's a statute of limitations. After a certain number of years, it varies from state to state, but after a certain number of years, you can't be prosecuted. Heck, if you rob a bank in some states, there's a statute of limitations. I think pretty much the only crime for which there is no statute of limitations is murder, which is, in my opinion, entirely appropriate that there not be a statute of limitations for murder. But why not put a statute of limitations on how long they can have, own, lock up, and exploit our browser histories, our search histories, our what we say to people in our emails, what we say in our messages on Messenger and text messages and things like that. What about a 6-month expiration date? And it can be a rolling date, so they've always got enough recent information that they can that they could say, oh, well, you're a big fan of dogs, so we're going to deliver the dog ads to you. I don't have a problem with that, but 6 months sounds reasonable.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
A lot going on in the news today. More. Sweden is getting pretty freaked out. More of that and your calls right after this. And welcome back. Robbie in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Robbie, thanks for listening to X-Ray FM. What's up?
Bit. I was talking about my book, Radicolution. I just want to hint a little bit at the regulation that I was reporting on that you brought up, that you want to talk about the deregulation, I should say, of the banking institutes. Do you remember the talk we had last week, Tom?
I don't.
We were talking about the financial industries and depression, and I came up my book, Radicolution, and also my current book. I'm going to be self-publishing it here, hopefully by the mid-month. It's going to be called The 100th Human Experiment. The 100th Human Experiment. Basically, we have a giant Federal Reserve, which is issuing money, which is a non-government entity, which is issuing money in the form of debt to banks, which then print it. And now, considering that the politicians are obviously in the hands of the bankers, they are the ones that are making this deregulation happen. So, to my understanding, the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, they don't have anything talking about how America should run its financial things. It's very, very lowly hinted at, and other. I mean,
well, at the time of the founding of the country, there was a huge debate about whether there should even be a national bank, and we went back and forth on that up until the 1850s or 60s.
Well, and Andrew Jackson,
he campaigned on doing away with it, and he did away with this. That was the second national bank. Yeah.
So what I want to tell here is the 100th Human Experiment. Are you familiar with the 100th Monkey Experiment? The 100th.
Yeah, I'm very familiar with it.
So what I want to tell people is, and this is what the book is about, is we are using this Federal Reserve System, which is printing fiat money in the form of debt. We have teachers walking out. We have people getting addicted to drugs because the pharmaceutical industry needs to thrive on them. Why not print money for the doctors to take care of us? Print whatever financial things that the teachers need. What do they want to be paid? Just cap it. And we print the money for the teachers and all the social services that we can't finance. If we stop letting the Federal Reserve printing money and letting these giant banks like J.P. Chase Morgan, which is sitting on $3.2 trillion in assets, which should be fluctuating through the economy, if we start printing money through the hospitals, through the benefit, through firefighters, imagine if we shift this stick of profiting off of killing people and exploiting people, if we shift the stick and we allow that, hey, let's make the money work for humans. This is what the 100th Human Experiment is, and I want to get that into people's heads because it is going to be a reality coming up very quick whenever there are going to be jobs going to be replaced by these robots. There are robotic warehouse there's warehouse robotics that are going to be replaced.
Oh, Amazon's got something like 20,000 of them now.
Yeah, and they're kind of paving the way. But imagine 5-10 years from now, these are going to be, there's going to be smaller corporations that are going to be implementing. And I'm not against that. It's going to save them money. It's going to make things faster and more efficient. But the fact of the matter is that we're going to be losing jobs. We're going to be losing middle class jobs. And right now, people are still, so upset about this financial industry. So here's the first rebuttal when I talk about printing money towards schools, which, teachers don't have to worry. You know what I mean? Imagine the trickle down coming from teachers and doctors telling people to live healthy and educate us.
Yeah, Stephanie Kelton is talking about this too. Not specifically that, but basically, creating money in order to deal with our social needs. The Fed, by the way, doesn't print money, I guess they do, our dollar bills, but the increases in our money supply are the result of lending. This is the core of the fractional reserve system. But in any case, Robbie, thanks for the call. We'll be right back. It's 20 minutes past the hour. Thom Hartmann Program. Let's see what you have to say today. Dave in Kalispell, Montana. Hey, Dave, what's on your mind?
Hey, this is a first-time call, and I just wanted to thank you for your public service.
Well, thank you for calling, Dave. What's up?
I wanted to touch on the idea of the conspiracy theory.
Which particular one?
The meta-conspiracy theory, which is there's a cover story for the Time magazine this week called "We Broke America." How my generation broke America.
Right. It's funny you're calling about that because I read that article this morning and I almost printed it out and then I realized it was 17 pages because I wanted to go off on it. I mean, it's not the boomers who broke America. It's Reaganomics. Now, and Reagan wasn't a boomer. He was the greatest. He was from the greatest generation, as were most of the people in Congress at that time. And I don't get it why people of my generation are being accused of breaking America when it was essentially my dad's generation, a very, very small number of right-wing cranks in my dad's generation who broke America in the 1980s with the so-called Reagan Revolution. Back to you, Dave.
And okay, hold on a second. Normally, I would totally agree with everything you just said. Okay,
but
the greatest generation went on a party. Okay.
Yeah.
And basically used up their 100-yard dash advantage in about 20
it's
years.
not even that. I don't mind the party, Dave. What they did was they changed our tax laws. And, they dropped the top tax rate from 74% to 25% during the Reagan administration. They stopped enforcing the Sherman antitrust.
I don't want to argue about the details here, but I just want to.
I think the details are important.
Point. I know the details are important when you have the general assumptions correct. And what I want to say is that the general assumption is that he backs this up to 50 years ago.
Right.
And I think it's not a coincidence that we just celebrated, for lack of a better word, the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Martin Luther King, and we're getting ready to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the assassination of Robert Kennedy.
Right.
And I'm not a great man theory of history buff, but I lived through that. And what I remember and what I've studied about since then is that there was a shift, and he describes that shift in this article, a shift from a kind of at least a poser of an elite that made an attempt to believe in that they had an obligation to public service, an obligation to the whole, to kind of every man for himself, and I would say the whole culture from a other-centered, and I'm not saying centered, but other included, to a self-interested society of a lifeboat ethic where black people went for black people, and white people went for white people, and women went for women, and white guys went for white guys, and it was every man for himself, and all these. And you notice in that article, all those conspiracies that he brings up can be at least informed by the idea that we gave up on the fact that people should be at least inclusive of other people's interests when they go about their lives.
Yeah, there was a massive shift, largely in the late 70s. In fact, Jimmy Carter even bought into this in the last 2 years of his presidency after Maggie Thatcher became Prime Minister of the UK and famously said there's no such thing as society, there's only a collection of individuals. There was this wholesale buy-in through the late 70s and throughout the 80s of Milton Friedman's theories. This was the triumph of the Mount Pelerin Society, of von Mises, of Hayek, all these so-called brilliant thinkers who basically said that, selfishness is what drives everything. Selfishness needs to be elevated to a religion. Ayn Rand, the objectivists, and it fed that kind of thinking, Dave.
Tom, is the spirit and the ideas that come forth in those kind of policies get started 10, 15 years before that.
Yep. Well, yeah, it was in the late 50s that these guys. I mean, it was in the late 40s that they actually started. It was in the late 50s that they started getting traction, and then through the 60s in a big way. Dave, thank you for the call. Fascinating topic. Maybe we can dig into it a little more detail next week. We'll be right back.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
It's the Thom Hartmann Program, the place where smart people get their news. Thom Hartmann University Book Club. Today we're reading from Ralph Nader's most recent book, Breaking Through Power. It's Easier Than We Think. This is from the first chapter. It's titled Plutocracy of Maximums, Democracy of Minimums. When I was a student at Princeton University, I learned from my anthropology studies the concentration of power in the hands of a few is common to all cultures, societies, nations, tribes, cities, towns, and villages. Even where the thirst for self-governance and democracy is strong, as was the case in New England towns before the American Revolution against King George III, wealthy Tories were there too. In central and western Massachusetts, the farmers used the term the river gods to describe the rich merchants using the Connecticut River as a possible profitable trading route. These days, most people protesting for economic justice use the term the 1% to describe the ultra-small group of people who wield enormous influence over our society today. There is something about the differences in skill, determination, lineage, avarice, and pure luck that stratifies most people from the rulers who dominate them. In the political realm, the few become dominant because they hoard wealth and are driven to exercise power over others. When a small group rules a society, the political system is considered an oligarchy. And when only money and wealth determine how a society is controlled, the political system is a plutocracy. From the standpoint of a democratic society, both oligarchy and plutocracy are inherently unjust and corrupt. Of course, there are variations in the degrees of authoritarianism and cruelty that each system exercises over the communities it relies on for workers and wealth. Scholars have resorted to using phrases like benign dictatorship or wise rules or paternalistic hierarchies to describe lighter touches by those few who impose their rule over the many. Thomas Paine simply called them tyrannies. People, families, and communities can only take so much abuse before they rise up to resist. The job of the rulers is always to find that line and provide the lowest level of pay, security, housing, consumer protection, healthcare, and political access for society so that they can extract and hoard the greatest amount of wealth, power, and immunity from justice for themselves. In many ways, the majority of Americans live in a democracy of minimums, while the privileged few enjoy a plutocracy of maximums. This small volume is not just about the ravages of power or the assaults against disadvantaged and downtrodden communities. The subject here is the dominating influence of the 1% in business, politics, health, education, and society as a whole. Over the past 50 years, Americans have suffered the relentless commercialization of everyday life, their privacy and their childhoods, their parks and prisons, their public budgets and foreign policy, their schools and religious institutions, their elections and governments, and the most basic societal institutions of them all, the family. Consider all the family functions that have been outsourced to business. Eating, cleaning, childcare, counseling, therapy, entertainment, sports, lawn work, simple repairs have been increasingly commercialized, commodified, packaged, and marketed back to us as products of luxury and convenience. Even mother's breast milk has been displaced by infant formula. In a plutocracy, commercialism dominates far beyond the realm of economics and business. Everything is for sale, and money is power. But in an authentic democracy, there must be commercial-free zones where the power of human rights, citizenship, community, equality, and justice are free from the corrupting influence of money. Our elections and our governments should be such commercial-free zones. Our environment, air, and water should never fall under the control of corporations or private owners. Children should not be programmed by a huckstering economy where their vulnerable consciousness becomes the target of relentless corporate marketing and advertising. American history demonstrates that whenever commerce dominates all aspects of national life, a host of ills and atrocities have not just festered and spread, but become normal. Enslavement, land grabs, war, ethnic cleansing, serfdom, child labor, abusive working conditions, corrupt political systems, environmental contamination, and immunity from the law for the privileged few. History also shows that whenever there have been periods when enough of the country organizes and resists, we see movements of people and communities breaking through power. Progress is made, rights are won, education and literacy increase, oppression is diminished. It was in this manner that people of conscience abolished the living nightmare imposed by the laws and whips of white enslavers. The nation moved closer to promises of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness expressed in the Declaration of Independence. We won more control over our work, our food, our land, our air, and our water. Women secured the right to vote. Civil rights were elevated and enforced. Public schools improved environments. Workplace collective bargaining and consumer protections did not spontaneously evolve. They were won by people demanding them and breaking through power. These moments of great progress are expressed in terms of new legislation, regulations, and judicial decisions that directly benefit life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The book, Breaking Through Power, by Ralph Nader. Breaking Through Power, it's easier than we think.
Want to connect with the show online? You can find the Thom Hartmann Program on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram.
Hartmann here with you. My apologies to our commercial radio stations. Apparently, we were playing music fairly loudly over our guests and over me and everything else.
Watch those segments on YouTube.
I think we have fixed that problem. Nevin in Boca Raton, Florida. Hey, Nevin, what's on your mind today?
Yes, I'm a first-time caller, although not a first-time listener. And I wanted to talk about some of the topics that you've been discussing about your book, Screwed and Rebooting the American Dream.
Mm-hmm.
I used to be a conservative. I used to adhere to the neoliberal ideology, and I've abandoned it for a variety of reasons. I'm also a self-published author myself. My roots are in the right, but how I abandoned neoliberalism initially comes from my strong anti-communism and anti-totalitarianism. And friends of mine showed this to me, how many conservatives, even the quote-unquote alleged Tea Party anti-socialists, were often the biggest supporters of the economic interests of communist China and Putin's Russia and things of that nature. And I started to read really almost a forgotten tradition of conservative and nationalist authors, James Burnham, to some degree Russell Kirk, William Hawkins, Anthony Harrigan, and others. And you had this tradition of conservatives. While not powerful, they opposed Reagan's support for mergers and acquisitions. They opposed free trade. I started to read the collected speeches and writings of Teddy Roosevelt, and that's how my philosophy has evolved into what I term constitutional American nationalism, which is really neither right nor left in the conventional sense. And I finally abandoned the Republican Party. I supported Trump. I supported Trump on various conservative broadcasts and shows, and I am extremely irate and infuriated by most of what he has been doing, particularly with the economics. And the reason why I supported him, I saw how the other candidates and what is called Conservative Incorporated hammered him. And I looked at what he said in the past as well as in his ghostwritten books, which we know from his ghostwriters he did read through them. I mean, he's an image-conscious individual who is very hungry about his ego and whatnot. And I looked at that and I saw that who he appointed as his vice presidential running mate, which I felt he should have appointed more of a sort of Midwestern type Democrat, maybe even a Sherrod Brown or a Jim Webb. kind of bridge the divide and create this new.
Nevin, forgive my interrupting you, but you've been going on for 2.5 minutes, and I don't understand what you're saying or where you're going with this. What's the point of your call?
Oh, yeah. No, I just wanted to let you know that I am another Trump supporter who is absolutely, completely disenchanted with his administration, and somebody who started off in the conservative right. And listening to your show and reading other books and seeing the world around me as more or less has converted, if you will. In fact, I would say that the neoliberal ideology actually doesn't conserve anything. It actually destroys what is considered, as Russell Kirk pointed out, the permanence of things.
Yes.
So I don't think you hear that too many people from the right, and I figured it would be very refreshing to hear that.
Well, thank you. It was, Nevin. I really appreciate it, and apologies for jumping on you there. Russell, you know, I read The Conservative Mind, Russell Kirk's 1951 book back in the 60s, and it had a big impact on me. I mean, you know, I read it when I was still supporting Barry Goldwater, when I was like 12, 13 years old. And, you know, as a principled conservative, and I was reading Barry Goldwater back then, too, there's a lot to be said for the philosophy of steady, cautious, careful, you know, the republic above the people, not the people, not the individual people, but I mean, you know, no one person, much like Donald Trump is doing right now, should ever elevate themselves above and beyond the rule of law to the point that they can screw things up, basically. You know, this administration, the Trump administration, is not conservative, not by any remote stretch of the imagination, at least in the classical sense of the word. And the whole conservative movement has basically been subsumed by Kochism, you know, by the Koch brothers and their libertarian philosophy, and you know, which has very little to do with any of the founding principles of this country. So, yeah.
Absolutely. There's a very good book I'd recommend to you, too. You may have read it. Borgman, I believe, is his last name. It was suppressed. It was called, I believe, The Myth of Laissez-Faire, which talks about, which challenged, it was released by the late 80s, and it talked about how a number of our founding fathers actually did not support pure laissez-faire, as a lot of the Koch, or the Kochtopuses, we'll call it, likes us to believe, essentially. And it talks about how Gallatin, Jefferson, Hamilton, the National Bank, the land grants, the support for public education as a means of enhancing our sense of an organic community as a nation, which to me is what conservatism was, and since really the early 1980s is no longer is.
Yeah, absolutely. And you had Ben Franklin starting the post office, Thomas Jefferson started the first free college in the United States, the University of Virginia, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Nevin, great conversation. Thank you so much for the call, and I hope we can talk again. Charles in Opelika, Florida. Hey, Charles, what's up?
Well, the Dow is down again.
Yeah, not hugely, though. It's just like 100 points or so, right?
Well, it started off at, like, earlier I saw 200, now it's down to 16. But, you know, this is not what we had under the Obama administration.
Yeah.
Kennedy, I think, was assassinated probably because he did want to withdraw the troops from Vietnam.
Now, Kennedy was assassinated because before the Kennedy administration, while J. Edgar Hoover was running the FBI and was being blackmailed by Trafficante and Marcello, you know, over being gay, that there had never been more than 18 prosecutions of organized crime in the history of the United States, and the word mafia was literally never used. J. Edgar Hoover denied the existence of the mafia right up until 1961. Jack Kennedy came into office, and his brother Bobby went on a holy crusade against the mafia. And in the first year of the Kennedy administration, there were over 700 prosecutions of the mafia, and they weren't after the little guys. They were going after the big guys. They kidnapped Marcello, deported him to Guatemala, dumped him in the middle of the jungle. They were prosecuting, I mean, it was just on and on and on, right? And the mob decided that for their own survival, they had to stop Bobby. And there was this famous meeting. I talked to the lawyer who was in the meeting. He was Jimmy Hoffa's lawyer. Jimmy Hoffa came down to Florida with $1 million in a briefcase, met with Marcello and Trafficante, and said, "I want you to kill Bobby Kennedy." And Trafficante famously said, if a dog is going to attack you, you don't cut off its tail, you cut off its head. and which meant, they all agreed that what that meant was got to kill Jack, not Bobby. That's what happened, Charles. And there's a huge body of evidence for that, which you can find in our books, Legacy of Secrecy or Ultimate Sacrifice.
Okay, well, and not at one point did they ever say that they had to go meet with the FBI director, and there was a conspiracy, and there was someone in their camp that was embedded from the deep state and all of this crap. And what I'm trying to say is, Donald Trump, what he is doing, he's subverting. He's subverting law. Out of 200 years of history of this country, I've never seen anything like this again. And if the Democratic leadership does not call on, a constitutional crisis, because now he's saying he don't want the Democrats there. I mean, this is it.
Yeah, and James Clapper agrees with you, by the way. A lifelong conservative intelligence officer. His new book is just astonishing. I'm looking forward to getting my own copy of it and digging through it. But Charles, spot on. Thanks a lot for the call. Jay in Chicago. Hey, Jay, what's up? You wanted to get back to Ibogaine?
Yeah, Tom, can you hear me?
Sure.
Hey, cool, man. Hey, long-time listener, first-time caller. Been hearing that a lot today. Ibogaine, it's a real life-saving, miraculous thing. About 10, 15 years ago, I'd actually heard about it. There's an old episode of Law and Order SVU, which, Law and Order is kind of like my comfort food when I go to sleep. But I used to have a really bad problem myself going through a time a little before it started coming out in the news. I've been going on about 9 years, 10 years this year with no problems. But when I first saw it, I was really interested, did a lot of research, and basically it is a shame because of the pharmaceutical companies. You cannot get it. And it's not a standard hallucinogen like your LSD and your peyote and your psilocybin mushrooms. Like you said, you have some knowledge of it. It does react to those opiate binders, and it also works for alcoholism with a 99% success rating with one pill. It's not. It's not like a daily thing like methanol or suboxone or.
Right.
It is available in America, though. Last I heard, it was I want to say Pennsylvania. I know it's still used in Canada, but it was originally.
So is this drug essentially a psychedelic?
Yeah, it's a very, very powerful hallucinogen.
That's interesting. I didn't realize that. I thought I must have been mixing it up with something else. But now I remember the conversation about that. And Leary and Richard Alper, before he changed his name to Ram Dass, back in the 50s and 60s, were doing just some groundbreaking research with addicts, with alcoholics, with lifelong depressives, with people who are suicidal, with people with post-traumatic stress disorder, using psychedelics to successfully treat all of those conditions, which is, by the way, the caveat here, don't go out and do this yourself. The cover story of, I believe it was last Sunday, maybe it's next Sunday, but I'm pretty sure it was last Sunday's New York Times Magazine, is by Michael Pollan, the guy who wrote the books on food. In fact, we're trying to get him on the program to talk about this, about how he took psilocybin and had this extraordinary experience. And these things are good. These are therapeutic when used correctly. They can be extremely destructive when they're not. Back to you, Jay.
Oh, no, I agree completely. I've actually, I'm a personal also when it comes to hallucinogens. I used to get terrible, terrible migraine headaches. And I know everyone's known about this for years, or at least they should. Psilocybin treatments, I took 5 of them, not through a doctor, on my own, just, which is not what I recommend anybody doing. But I would get debilitating headaches to where I was on all sorts of painkillers. I mean, that's kind of how I fell into that world. And 5 treatments with, the information I could get from doctors who I couldn't mention their name or information off the internet. I've been migraine-free going on 10 years as well.
Wow.
So, and I mean, it's kind of a shame that, there's, that's just 2-3 examples of a world of, possible uses for these so-called hallucinogenics or psychedelic drugs that aren't even allowed to be researched. I mean,
fascinating. Fascinating.
Look at
Real quick, Jay, we're running out of time here, but you mentioned that your comfort food was Law and Order. Have you seen the new NBC series Taken?
I have not.
This show, the writers of this show have got to be liberals. Back when I was growing up, 60 Minutes used to go after, banks that ripped people off, companies that polluted and destroyed neighborhoods and whatnot. And of course, they don't do any of that anymore. But in this show, it's a rock'em sock'em movie. It's, in every episode, somebody is kidnapped or something is taken, and the hero of the show is a guy who beats people up and shoots them and whatnot. I mean, it's one of those kind of shows, right? And a lot of violence in it, but it's not. But it's almost like the A-Team. It's kind of, it's not the kind of violence that makes you wince like you see on so many of these shows now, but. He goes after banks. He goes after a pharmaceutical company that's killing people. He goes after, groups and people and whatnot that are just doing damage to others. And Louise and I started watching it last week, and we've been like binge watching this thing. It's on Hulu, and it's called Taken. But it's a great series. Anyhow, if you like Law and Order, I think you'll love this. Jay, thanks for the information on Ibogaine, and thanks for recalibrating my understanding of it. I now remember the whole story, and thank you very much. I appreciate that. And thanks for listening to WCPT. We'll be right back.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit thomhartmann.com for audio and video archives.
48 minutes past the hour. We'll be back with more of your calls right after this. And welcome back. Paul in Illinois watching us on Free Speech TV in Chicago. Hey, Paul, what's up?
Hi, how you doing?
Good. What's on your mind?
Okay, I'm a Bernie Sanders fan, but I want to make a comment. I want your opinion on this, on the Dodd-Frank thing that you're talking about. The Dodd-Frank bill, the banking bill.
Right.
One of the things that I did not like about it is that it made the banks put billions of dollars in reserves. A lot of money, billions of dollars reserve, which was good for big banks like Chase and like Bank of America, but these community banks could not do it, and they went out. A lot of them went out of business, and a lot of them are still going out of business because they can't put that much money in reserve.
Actually, that's not true, Paul. The banks that have gone out of business haven't gone out of business. They've been absorbed by much larger banks.
Okay, they've been bought off.
Number one. And number two, the reserves, it's not some arbitrary amount. It's a percentage of your deposits. So or your loans. So, banks should be able to backstop themselves if they have a large percentage of loans going bad or if a lot of people start withdrawing their money. And that's why banks have reserves. And when you lower those reserve requirements, you end up with a situation which is the exact same situation that we had in 2007, where, there was a run on the banks, basically, and the banks could not make themselves whole.
I was wrong. Well, if what you're saying is true, how come I read in many mainstream newspapers that the community banks are going out of business because...
You will not hear that from community banks. You're hearing that from... The big banks they just had their most profitable quarter ever. They literally made billions of dollars. These big banks who just made billions of dollars can easily take a few $1 million, peel it off, give it to PR firms, give it to right-wing think tanks and shills who will say anything from like Mike Pence saying tobacco doesn't cause cancer, to whatever. And
not exactly right-wing media, though. I mean,
no, it's not right-wing media. It's a massive publicity campaign, and it did break through. But, the majority of Democrats in both the House and Senate understood that this is simply a giveaway to the big banks. There are a few who are taking money from the big banks. There always have been Democrats who take money from the big banks, and that's what's going on, Paul.
So the community banks are not going out of business?
No, community banks are doing just fine, thank you very much. I bank with one of them. They're just fine.
Okay, but I read so much different than that, so that's all I want to say. Okay, thank you for taking the call, but
You're welcome.
So much different.
You're welcome. Good talking to you, Paul. Elaine in Bellingham, Washington, watching us on Facebook Live. Hey, Elaine.
Hi, Tom. This is Elaine, and I'm calling about, I have a
Senator Rick Larson Representative Rick Larson is the representative from the 2nd Congressional District, and he's a new Democrat, came in the 1990s.
Are you calling from Minnesota?
No, I'm calling from Washington.
Oh, I thought Rick
Bellingham,
Larson was from
Washington.
Minnesota. Huh. I guess I'm wrong.
No. Well, he spells his name S-E-N, Rick Larson with an E.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So he's the guy who voted for the banking bill?
Yes, and
I see.
he seems to think that his constituents are bowing. But another thing about, and I don't want to do a circular firing squad with him because he does vote well in many cases.
Real quickly.
Quickly, I-1600, universal health care. Please get it on the ballot. He is against universal health care, but we have it in Washington State.
There you
universal health care.
Okay, so it's going to be on the ballot in the election in November?
Well, we hope so. We want people to sign the petition.
Sign the petitions. Great. Elaine, thank you so much. We'll be back. It's Viagra for your brain, the Thom Hartmann Program, but does not lead to stiff thinking. Steve in North Troy, Vermont. Hey, Steve, greetings to the home of the Northern Lights.
Oh, greetings, Tom. Thank you very much. I think we might have missed one of the biggest stories of the century recently. It just came out that and there was only a blurb on Forbes and NPR. Well, and this professor in Michigan, that the Pentagon cannot account for $29 trillion lost from 98 to like 2016.
Wait a minute, 29 trillion. I mean, the gross domestic product of the United States is only 15 trillion. The U.S. budget is only 3 trillion. How could you lose $29 trillion over a 20-year period?
You got to look it up, Tom. It's out on the net. Like I said, NPR had a little blurb about it, and this guy the professor in Michigan had brought it to light, and it got a little bit of coverage, but nobody's touching this one, and a lot of people think it's for black ops and stuff like that, but it's a whole. I mean, they don't know. And even their IG's report, which it was based on, the IG said that they couldn't answer simple questions like how many people do you have here, how much did you spend, what did you spend it on, simple stuff like that.
Well, the Pentagon's never been audited. And, I mean, going all the way back to the creation of the Pentagon, the modern-day Pentagon, around the time of World War II, never been audited. But I always thought that the number that they couldn't account for was 2 trillion, not 29 trillion. That's breathtaking. I'm going to have to dig into that, Steve. Thank you for the heads up.
Look it up. Thanks, Tom.
I'll see what I can find, and we'll talk about it later on when I've got the detailed information. Thank you. Rick in Portland, Oregon. Hey, Rick, what's on your mind today?
Well, hi, Tom. I've been a long-time listener. I really appreciate what you're doing, man.
Thank you.
You touched a little bit on something with Jack Kennedy and dealings with mafia and how that might have led to his assassination.
Yeah.
And I just kind of see a little correlation there with what's going on with Trump right now in election campaigns. I'm kind of wondering if I'm imagining things with American mafia maybe marrying up with the Russian oligarch mafia and sprinkling in a little Nazi points of view and a takeover of our country. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, increasingly, over roughly the last 40 years, the classic La Cosa Nostra, American-Italian mafia has died. It's a tiny shell of what it was. And it's been replaced in large part by a business mafia, by people using corporations and using great wealth to accomplish what the mob did. Running the loan sharking business. It's now called payday lending. Human trafficking is a little more underground. It's not as visible, but many areas the weapons business. It's loan sharking, gambling has now become state enterprises. And so what you're seeing is that the classic businesses of the mob have just been, quote, made legitimate, but it's not really legitimate. With regard to foreigners, there's a mob or the equivalent of a mafia in every country. And apparently Michael Cohen was deeply in bed with some of these folks as well back in his taxi days. Although time will tell. I mean, we'll see what comes out of this. Rick, thanks a lot for the call. It's been a fascinating day. We'll be back tomorrow for another one. In the meantime, don't forget, democracy is not a spectator sport, as both Barack Obama and Bernie Sanders regularly said. You got to get active. You got to participate. So get out there, get active, tag. You're it. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by the Aiden Forecast, an investment newsletter with weekly updates of leading market indicators and a monthly deep dive into what the details of the economy and the markets mean for investors and retirees. On the web at aidenmarkets.com. The Thom Hartmann Program is brought to you in part by Super Beets. Super Beets are sourced from non-GMO beets, and they're packed with dietary nitrates, helping to produce nitric oxide for more energy, stamina, and support for healthy blood pressure levels naturally.
Call 800-568-9889 or go to tomsbeets.com. That's 800-568-9889, Tom's Beets, THOMSBEETS.com.
Thank you.